Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, be it resolved that the report of the Standing Finance Committee of the whole House of Representatives, consisting of all members of the House, on the estimates of expenditure 21-22 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, the Jamaica Public Body's estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year ending March 31st, 2022, the Government of Jamaica Fiscal Policy Paper for the financial year 2021-2022, the medium-term debt management strategy for the financial year 2021-2022 to the financial year 2024-2025, the revenue estimates 2021 for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, the tax expenditure statement 2021, and the 2021-2022 public sector consolidated estimates of expenditure for the financial year ending March 31st, 2022, which was laid on the table of the House on the 9th day of March 2021 to be approved. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. Madam Speaker, I also beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move to introduce and have read a first time a bill entitled An Act to Apply a Sum out of the Consolidated Fund to the service of the year ended on the 31st day of March 2022 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament. Madam Speaker, I also beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take first reading and to commence debate on the second reading of this bill.
Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Madam Speaker, public business today will consist primarily of the motion from the Ethics Committee, the motion by the Minister of Mining and Transport, and of course, the presentation of the estimates of expenditure and the commencement of the budget debate led by the Minister of Finance. In that order, may it please you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I now move the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Question is that the motion, notice of which the Deputy Speaker gave notice of, be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Motion approved.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Madam Speaker, sorry, if I may.
Yes.
Is that the motion to approve the amendment to the regulations?
It is a motion, but it's not going to be debated. Well, he's tabling it, you know, and then I think we late at this time. So he's not really asking for approval from the sense that the process would have been completed.
My apologies. The motion is, we're not asking the House to approve the motion today. My apologies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion regarding the report of the Standing Finance Committee, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Go ahead, Minister.
Madam Speaker, as we all know, the subject of the budget debate is the appropriation bill. But before the debate commences, the report of the Standing Finance Committee tabled today must be adopted. Therefore, Madam Speaker, I now move that the motion for the adoption of the report of the Standing Finance Committee, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
The question before the House is that the motion for the adoption of the report of the Standing Finance Committee be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Appropriation Act 2021 to give notice of second reading of the bill and to commence debate on the motion for second reading.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister of Finance and Public Service to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Appropriation Act 2021, to give notice of a second reading of the bill and to commence the debate on the motion for the second reading. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill shortly entitled the Appropriation Act 2021, read a first time.
Minister?
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of the second reading of the bill. Madam Speaker, I begin Madam Speaker, by thanking Almighty God, from whom all blessings flow. Great is thy faithfulness. Amen. Great is thy mercy and thy loving kindness. Amen. Madam Speaker, I could not have possibly made it through this year without the support of family, friends, and colleagues. Due to the restrictions caused by COVID-19, there are actually no guests in the gallery today, apart from persons who are here as a part of their job. A most unusual sight for a day like today. In fact, there are many empty seats in Parliament due to the measures that have been introduced and the necessity for the Parliament of the country to lead by example.
Hear, hear.
To those watching on television, on cable, on social media, and to members of the diaspora overseas, thank you for tuning in. Usually the executive of St. Andrew Northwestern would be here. Today, like everyone else, due to the pandemic, they watch at home. I wish to thank them, along with the councillors of the constituency, Councillor MacLeod, Councillor Smith, and Councillor Harris, for their steadfast support and for working with me to advance the interests of the citizens of Northwest St. Andrew under these highly unusual times. Madam Speaker, to my parliamentary colleagues, many of whom wanted to be here today, but who have had to stay home to keep the numbers in this small space consistent with what is healthy and safe, I thank you for your support and encouragement. To the new parliamentarians, you have added so much energy and vibrancy to this House over the past 6 months. Thank you. And I thank the staff of the House of Parliament on whom I rely, and we all rely, and who are all so gracious in the performance of their duties, COVID or no COVID. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, has been an exemplary leader during this year of crisis. He has been courageous, he has been empathetic, and he has been wise. I thank him for his leadership, his counsel, his advice, and his support. Under the most excruciatingly difficult and challenging circumstances brought on by the pandemic, he has been unshakable. And thank God we have Andrew Holness as Prime Minister at a time like this. Madam Speaker, I thank my Cabinet colleagues for their support and for a working environment characterized by teamwork, cohesiveness, and shared vision. We have had to make tough decisions this past year, and our deliberations have regularly gone into the night with Jamaica's best interests as our North Star. Jamaica benefits from a first-class team at the Ministry of Finance, and I thank them for their dedication and commitment. I thank Minister Marsha Smith, who has jumped in the deep end and who is working with me to make sure that Jamaica recovers stronger. I thank the Financial Secretary, Darlene Morrison, and her team at the Ministry, as well as my advisory staff. I also thank the administrative and ancillary staff in my office and the security staff assigned to me, who always go beyond the call of duty. I'd also like to thank the board, management, and staff of the Bank of Jamaica, the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and all other agencies in the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, critical institutions that play a key role in Jamaica's economy. Again, Mr. Speaker, most of all, I'd like to thank my family who are unable to be here today and who share me with Northwest St. Andrew and by extension, Jamaica. To my brothers and sisters, thank you. To my wife and children, thank you for your love and your support. You helped me maintain balance and perspective, and without you, I could not do what I do. I'm indebted to my parents, the late Justice Neville Clark and Mrs. Mary Clark, for imparting values I cherish in our upbringing. Madam Speaker, this past year has been one of the most difficult and challenging years on record for Jamaica, for Jamaicans, and for all of humanity. The coronavirus, a living organism incapable of life on its own, has sought hosts in the human population at great damage to our health, and with the skillful and uncanny ability to hop unnoticeably from one human to another through respiratory activity. Up to yesterday, over 117 million persons around the world, including nearly 27,000 Jamaicans, have contracted the virus, which has caused severe illness, hospitalization, and death around the world. Over 2.6 million people have died, including over 450 Jamaicans, making this the most devastating pandemic in over 100 years. Madam Speaker, I pause to express solidarity with all the individuals and families who have been impacted by this deadly disease, with those who have lost loved ones, those still in hospital, and with others still in isolation. In March and April of last year, governments around the world moved swiftly to curtail the spread of the coronavirus by restricting the movement of people. Airports and seaports around the world were shut for weeks and months, and borders were sealed. Travel restrictions were imposed, and many still remain in effect today. School has been interrupted for much of the past year, and life as we knew it has been completely upended and disrupted. Over the past 12 months, many have not been able to attend the funerals of close associates due to gathering limits. Others have had to restrict the attendance of loved ones for their most treasured celebrations, weddings, the traditional Christmas dinner, and special family occasions. We have had to adapt to a radically changed environment, and some have found it difficult to adapt as fast or as comfortably as others. And just when normality seemed to be gradually returning, the government found it necessary to impose restrictive measures over a 3-week period as COVID-19 case volume mounted and hospitalizations surged to worrying levels and intensive care capacity approached its breaking point. As Prime Minister Holness has said, these decisions are never easy and will always be difficult. There are always those who suffer far more than others and those who pay a steep, often painful price. On behalf of the government of Jamaica, I want to take this opportunity while opening the budget debate to say that this government does not take these decisions lightly. And they often involve many hours of agonizing debate. I want to use this opportunity publicly to let the people of Jamaica know that we hear you, we understand your concerns, we share your pain, and we remain steadfast in our commitment to act in the best interest of all Jamaicans as we seek to balance lives and livelihoods in the interest of all Jamaicans. Madam Speaker, the toll on the mental health caused by isolation and social distancing, especially for the elderly and school-aged children, is as yet unaccounted for, and the lost school time among the global student population around the world will likely have an impact into the future. If that were not enough, though, Madam Speaker, the effect of these measures ushered in a companion calamity, a full-blown global economic crisis. The global economic crisis only invites comparison with the global economic conditions during the world wars. This economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is by far the worst global economic crisis since World War II. Hundreds of millions of people around the world have lost jobs, and the global economy has been decimated. The economic impact of the pandemic in Jamaica has led to an economic decline without parallel in Jamaica's entire history. Make no mistake, Madam Speaker, the economic crisis is a dangerous one. Uncertainties abound and risks are high. For one, future measures introduced by the government or prolonged extension of existing measures to control the spread of the virus could have an impact on budgetary projections. The good news, Madam Speaker, is that the vaccines arrived yesterday and the vaccination program will begin tomorrow. And by the end of the new fiscal year 2021-2022, the Ministry of Health and Wellness anticipates that our population will reach herd immunity from the COVID-19 disease. Furthermore, Jamaica's trading partners are advanced in their own vaccination programs and could complete vaccination of their own populations by the end of the first or second quarter of the new fiscal year. Though it is often darkest before dawn, from all we can see and discern, it certainly looks as if we are about to enter the phase of the health crisis that can be described as the beginning of the end. For the economic crisis, however, Madam Speaker, we may only be at the end of the beginning. Our objectives and our goals are to have a faster economic recovery than we have ever had before, and to recover stronger than before. We will achieve this through disciplined policy choice, through prioritizing within priorities, by maintaining a keen awareness of risk, and by modernizing our economy. To do so, Madam Speaker, it's important that we first consider the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Jamaican economy. The economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Jamaica can be expressed in a staggering set of numbers that really boggle the mind. On growth, the Planning Institute of Jamaica expects the economy to contract by approximately 12% this fiscal year, ending March 31st, 2021. This is by far the worst economic contraction in Jamaica's history. No previous economic decline comes even remotely close. For calendar year 2020, that is January to December of 2020, the economy is expected to have contracted by 10%, as compared with the period January to December of 2019. The closest comparisons were the decline of 6.5% in 1975, 5.7% in 1980, 4.6% in 1985, 3.9% in 1974, and 3.2% in 2009. None of these, Madam Speaker, was remotely close to the economic contraction that we have all lived through in 2020. The economic decline was driven by a massive 70% contraction in the tourism industry. With the exception of the construction sector, which PIOJ expects to show modest growth for 2021, all sectors of the economy have declined during the 2021 fiscal year. During April to June, construction declined by 14%, but grew by 7% in July to September, and was forecasted to have grown by 6.2% in October to December quarter. Yes, Madam Speaker, the construction sector is growing despite the COVID-19 pandemic. This growth is a reflection of the belief of those builders and developers that this too shall pass, and that there is a brighter future ahead for Jamaica. It is also a reflection, Madam Speaker, of the importance of good policy. Central bank modernization, inclusive of the policy shift to inflation targeting, provided the space for interest rates to be reduced 10 times in succession to record lows, which allowed builders and developers to finance projects at attractive prices that have fueled the construction boom. In addition, the reduction and abolishment of transaction taxes on real estate under this government provided a further fillip to development. So even the pandemic, Madam Speaker, could not blunt the impact of good and disciplined policy in this regard. Madam Speaker, in the biggest economic crisis in nearly 80 years, where the economy declined in a way no one in Jamaica has ever experienced before, we had the largest number of new company registrations and business registrations in our history. Between 2014 and 2019, new company and new business registrations had consistently increased each year with the steadily improving economic and business climate. The number of new company formations for each month of this current fiscal year ending in March was greater than the number of new company incorporations in the corresponding month of the previous non-pandemic year. And in total, despite the pandemic, more new companies were formed, more new businesses were registered than the previous year, and more than at any time in our history. Now, clearly, Madam Speaker, by itself, this is not an indicator of current economic activity, but it is an indicator of intentions, and it is an indicator of possibilities. And it is a great thing that more companies are being formed than at any time in our past. Madam Speaker, the policies of abolishing the minimum business tax and the asset tax and providing the tax credit for medium-sized enterprises has created an environment where entrepreneurs and those who are inclined to start businesses move in a direction of formal incorporation, and that is a good thing. Madam Speaker, on revenues and expenditure, even after factoring in inflation, the government's revenues are expected to decline by 70 billion or more this fiscal year as compared with the previous one. Yet the government continued with the provision of goods and services, even as expenditures also increased by a net amount of $24 billion on account of the pandemic. However, direct COVID-19 related expenditures, so you can see on the graph, our revenues declined by $70 billion in the last fiscal year. And you'd have to go back to 2017-18 to find a comparable year when we had revenues at this level. And that's after 3 years of inflation. Inclusive of the amount spent in the third supplementary estimates of 2019-20, the central government spent approximately $40 billion responding to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, consisting of the CARE program, health expenditure support of public bodies affected by the pandemic, and incremental compensation expenditure, in particular in health and security. This $40 billion does not include the measures implemented by the National Housing Trust or the Student Loan Bureau or other public bodies to help cushion the pandemic's impact. On jobs, Madam Speaker, it took 4 years between 2016 and 2020 for the Jamaican economy to add 100,000 jobs. This is one of the most painful graphs. It took 4 years to add 100,000 jobs, as you can see, from 2016 to 2020. And in 4 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, over 130,000 jobs were lost. Madam Speaker, the Jamaicans who lost jobs in the pandemic could fill every seat in the National Stadium 4 times over. When we talk about economic recovery, therefore, we're talking about eventually, but the good news, Madam Speaker, is that you see, you just keep that graph, that the quarter ending October, the number of employed jumped, and we expect that and hope for that to continue. So when we're talking about economic recovery, we're talking about eventually getting every single one of those Jamaicans back in a job. That is our goal. That is our mission. Madam Speaker, Jamaica experienced the lowest level of unemployment of Jamaica's history in October 2019, just 4 months before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The unemployment rate jumped to 12.7% by July, and by October of 2020, it had recovered to 10.7%, still too high, but moving, Madam Speaker, in the right direction. With respect to foreign exchange, Madam Speaker, as you know, Jamaica's 2 largest sources of foreign exchange are tourism and remittances. COVID-19 has decimated Jamaica's foreign exchange inflows from tourism. And again, there is absolutely no parallel in Jamaica's history for what has occurred. Just by way of comparison, during the terrorist attacks of 9/11, tourism earnings declined by 14%. In the global financial crisis, tourism earnings declined by 5%. Madam Speaker, a reality that all of us should have imprinted in our minds is that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Jamaica's foreign exchange inflows from tourism are projected to fall by 74%, or $2.5 billion, Madam Speaker, and setting us back by 30 years. You have to go all the way back to 1992-93, or rather 1993-94, to find a year where we earned so little from tourism. We will have no choice, Madam Speaker, but to recover our foreign exchange inflows such that we surpass, and look at those years just before the pandemic, at the pace of growth of the tourism exchange, tourism inflows. No wonder Minister Ed Bartlett would have received all those awards. I never used to understand it until I look at the graph. Look at that, very impressive, but it just fell off a cliff in the pandemic. But our mission, Madam Speaker, and our goal is to recover faster and to recover stronger. There is a silver lining, Madam Speaker. So that graph, just bear that in mind for me. Okay? Madam Speaker, there's a silver lining. Jamaica's diaspora rose to the occasion, and although they faced their own COVID-19 related challenges, faithful Jamaicans abroad sent $600 million more to their family members and friends in Jamaica, 23% more than the previous year. I've reviewed 30 years of remittance data, Madam Speaker, and never before have remittances increased in a single year by anything close to $600 million or 23%. Never, it has always been incremental. Madam Speaker, on behalf of all Jamaicans, I'd like to use this opportunity to both recognize and to thank all of those kind members of the diaspora, those considerate and caring members in the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom, the Caribbean and the world, who never forget their families and their friends right here in Jamaica, and who stepped up to embrace the command outlined in the Holy Book that we should not forget to do good unto others. Now, I should quickly point out, Madam Speaker, that some of this increase, not all, but some, could be due to the fact that the informal channels by which foreign exchange reaches Jamaica, somebody travel abroad, gets some money from an aunt, or the aunt comes to Jamaica, leaves some money here, those informal channels have largely not been available. And so people have had to gravitate to the formal channels. But an increase like $600 million, Madam Speaker, is intentional. That's a lot of money. And we have to thank the diaspora for that. As a result, Madam Speaker, on imports, we had a fall based on the data to September 2020, which is just half of the fiscal year. The Bank of Jamaica estimates that imports fell by $1.4 billion for the fiscal year, which served to offset some of the effects of the fall in the flows from tourism. Tourism declined by $2.5 billion, $600 million came in from remittances more, imports fell by 1.4, beginning to balance. The fall in imports was impacted by reductions in the price of oil, as well as lower demand for certain products like imported food and manufactured goods by the tourism sector due to hotel closures and significantly lower occupancy levels. As a result of these factors, Madam Speaker, the Bank of Jamaica estimates that the current account deficit only deteriorated from 1.6% to 1.7%, well within the margins of what is safe and prudent. This, Madam Speaker, is a remarkable achievement for Jamaica. The current account deficit is our foreign exchange deficit with the rest of the world before you add foreign direct investment. So you can see in the last, the last 6 years, we've had a modest current account deficit. And current account deficits are not, if your current account deficit is being used to finance capital goods because you're importing lots of heavy equipment and heavy duty machinery to build big industrial parks, that's a deficit that you can absorb because you know it's going to lead to income in the future. If on the other hand, your current account deficit is for consumer, right, like what we had in the past, you see that graph, those years there with the heavy blues, those were largely current account deficits that were unstable. We've been able, as a country, to turn it around, and it's it's a blessing, Madam Speaker, and an achievement that in the worst pandemic in 100 years, you could not look on that graph and tell which year the pandemic occurred in. You could not tell which of those graphs was the year with the once in 100-year hit, Madam Speaker. No one could ever imagine that Jamaica could withstand a $2.5 billion collapse in tourism receipts while maintaining stability. Now, Madam Speaker, there is an upside risk that as a result of strong, if we get growth this year, we could have a growth in imports that recovers faster than our tourism inflows. So we're not out of the woods, there's still management to happen. And this would exert pressures on our current account. So in other words, there could be a lag effect between when growth starts to happen and consumer spending picks up and when tourism inflows begin to recover previous levels. With respect to debt, Madam Speaker, over the last few years, this government has pursued a prudent policy of building up cash reserves to pay down on debt. We opened last year with reserves of $90 billion, or close to over 4% of GDP. And as a result, when the COVID-19 pandemic came, we were able to finance a 3.5% fiscal deficit without materially increasing nominal debt. To put it more simply, Madam Speaker, though we have endured the most massive economic shock in our history, our nominal debt remained flat during the year. Again, Madam Speaker, most countries cannot report this. In fact, very few can. You look on the evolution of Jamaica's public debt during 2020, in all ways, total public debt, or external debt, or domestic debt, the debt of our public bodies, and it's completely flatlined in the worst economic crisis in our history. Madam Speaker, in fact, the stock of foreign currency denominated debt decreased during the fiscal year. The central government lent Clarendon Alumina Partners, CAP, $140 million to repay a loan obligation due to the Noble Group, which has lowered CAP's interest costs and allowed CAP to renegotiate its marketing agreement with Noble, improving its prices. We also swapped $50 million of IDB, US dollar denominated debt, into J dollar debt in an innovative transaction pioneered by the IDB. Both of these transactions contributed to the lowering of the nominal US dollar denominated debt during the fiscal year. And this compares with other crises, Madam Speaker, where the US dollar nominal debt increases during crises. We have had the experience this year in the worst economic crisis where the nominal US dollar debt actually decreased. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the historically savage nature of the COVID-19 shock, Jamaica has maintained its international credit rating thus far. Early in the crisis, we took the initiative to contact the credit rating agencies and provided them with an assessment of the crisis from our perspective, the principles that ground our response and our actions. They have thus far maintained Jamaica's credit rating in the worst crisis in our history as compared with credit rating downgrades of other countries. So you see, these are all the countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. And if you just peruse the graph, many of them have had downgrades during 2020 as a result of the crisis. Jamaica is one of, is not alone, one of a number or a few who have been able to retain their credit rating, notwithstanding the outlook. The highest credit ratings that Jamaica had in 20 years from Standard & Poor's and 14 years from Fitch have thus far been maintained through the worst crisis in our history. Let's reflect on that. Madam Speaker, your trajectory, your direction, and where you are going is just as important as your position at a particular point in time. We may be down, but the agencies know that before long, we shall rise again. That is our goal. Now, the risk of downgrade remains. Our debt is at 110% of GDP, which introduces other risks. And one rating firm has expressed the view that if growth does not materialize this year at levels above our long-term average, they would consider downgrading. So we shall see. Madam Speaker, due to Jamaica's policy discipline, we entered this crisis with substantial buffers. Due to fiscal overperformance, which is when you manage revenue and expenditure cycles to achieve better fiscal outcomes than you planned, we were able to accumulate cash reserves over time, and in particular, in the few years before the pandemic. Due to the reintegration of public bodies, we reintegrated the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica into the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, and approximately $6 billion went into the consolidated fund as a result of that exercise. PCJ was a conglomerate back in the day with 13 subsidiaries. By 2020, it only had one subsidiary, and the purpose of the superstructure was no longer necessary. So we took the hard decision of consolidating it into the ministry, and we salute the bold decision of Honorable Favour Williams for taking that step. Good policy is not easy, Madam Speaker. Resources in excess of $25 billion were added to the Consol Fund as a result of the privatization of Wigton Wind Farm and Trans-Jamaica Highway, inclusive of the refinancing of the former's debt, which retired obligations to the Government of Jamaica. Now, last year, I announced with great enthusiasm that we had accumulated significant cash resources that would be used to prepay debt in an amount of 4% of GDP, which would have reduced our debt ratio to the mid-80s, creating much-needed fiscal space going forward. Well, as we all know, COVID-19 intervened, and we did not get to do that. But there's a proverb that says, preparation is better than good luck. Amen. With close to $90 billion of cash resources, which resulted from thoughtful policy choices, thank God, we were better prepared for this crisis. My fellow Jamaicans, policy matters. And good policy matters more. Good policies expand opportunities and provide flexibility when we need it to respond to crises. But good policies require that we think about tomorrow as well as today. For the 2 fiscal years prior to the pandemic, we tucked away more resources in the contingencies fund than has ever been placed there in the 30 years prior, cumulatively, when you add it all up. In fact, the contingencies fund only had $100 million from 1992, and it never changed. In the 2 years prior to the pandemic, we added $4 billion to the contingencies fund, which was only to be drawn down in the event of a disaster. And the then opposition spokesperson was gracious enough to, because we didn't put the legislation in place at the time, but on the basis of an understanding that we'd put the money away and only draw it down in disaster. Yeah, so we recognize that. So, Madam Speaker, when the economy was locked down in the first quarter of the fiscal year, job losses were mounting, and we needed to get the care payments out on the emergency conditions. We were able to draw down on this contingencies fund. My fellow Jamaicans, I say it again, policy matters, and good policy matters even more. Madam Speaker, good policies pay dividends. Yes. And they require that we think about tomorrow as well as today. Our foreign exchange reserves, which the Bank of Jamaica manages on our behalf, are what provide assurance to the external suppliers of goods and services and suppliers of credit to Jamaica that Jamaican firms can pay their external bills when they come due. If we had little or no foreign exchange reserves, businesses would not be able to finance the purchase of raw materials or intermediate or finished goods, and we would live a deprived existence. Just prior to this crisis, our foreign exchange reserves were in the region of their highest levels in history. For a long time prior to this, however, a significant stock of our foreign exchange reserves were borrowed from investors in the forms of certificates of deposits owing to these investors. Between 2016 and 2019, we increased our non-borrowed reserves, i.e. the reserves that belong to the people of Jamaica, by over $1 billion US, which put us in a good position when the crisis hit. Now, Madam Speaker, suppose we had buckled under the pressure and deviated from policy, and it ended up that the central bank had squandered those reserves when the pressure licked in 2018, 2019, and we were transitioning to exchange rate flexibility. What would have happened to us when COVID came? What would have happened when tourism earnings collapsed by 2.5 billion US dollars? Where would we be now? Madam Speaker, our foreign exchange reserves belong to all Jamaicans. And the reality, Madam Speaker, is that they exist to protect us in times when the normal flows of foreign exchange have been interrupted. That's right. Right? Like this year, 2.5 billion wipeout. You're going back 30 years. That's right. That is what your reserves are there for. Not to respond to my fellow Jamaicans, policy matters. Good policy matters even more. And the discipline to stick to good policy when the going gets rough is priceless and pays huge dividends. Madam Speaker, after 7 years of sacrifice across 2 administrations, our debt to GDP ratio was at its lowest levels in 20 years. Although our nominal debt remained flat due to the significant decrease in our GDP, Madam Speaker, Jamaica's debt to GDP ratio jumped a staggering 16 points from 94% to 110%. So look, we managing this thing, have the 90 billion of cash, keep our nominal debt flat, but because GDP collapsed, the debt to GDP ratio, which is not a theoretical concept, jumped from 94% to 110. Now, the reason why that's important is because the size of your economy determines the revenues you can earn from the economy. That's right. Right? So when your debt, as expressed as the size of the economy, goes up to those levels, you have to watch it. We have been there before. We have been there before. And last time I said once on the way up, once on the way down, but we've been there earlier too, because we know that debt was pretty high 30 years ago as well. So, Madam Speaker, because of our policy decisions, Jamaica is able to absorb and accommodate this dizzying increase in our debt ratio without interruption of macroeconomic stability. Madam Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic was confirmed to have arrived on our shores on the afternoon of last year's budget presentation. I remember it well. From the very outset, Madam Speaker, in my closing budget presentation, I believe it might have been 14 days later, I set out the principles that would guide our response to the crisis. We sought to maintain the previously elusive macroeconomic stability for which the Jamaican people have sacrificed so much. We aim to provide social and economic support to households and businesses and to finance the health response. Madam Speaker, we launched a $25 billion stimulus consisting of 3 pillars. We reduced GCT from 16.5% to 15%, which returned $14 billion to the Jamaican consumers. And we implemented the MSME tax credit and had a $10 billion fiscal contingency, which later was used to seed the CARE program. Along with 100 countries, Madam Speaker, around the world, we applied for access to the IMF Rapid Financing Facility and were approved for the maximum amount of 100% of our quota, or $500 million in a matter of weeks. Madam Speaker, that $500 million US dollars sits at the Bank of Jamaica as an extra layer of insulation. Yes, that's right. That's right. Due to the fiscal deviation caused by the crisis, which was in excess of 4% of GDP, we suspended our fiscal rules, which enabled us to run a fiscal deficit of 3.5% as opposed to the programmed 0.5% surplus. The central bank, Madam Speaker, did their job too. They stepped in with unprecedented liquidity support to financial institutions, pumping more than $50 billion into financial markets. This in turn provided stability to capital markets and allowed financial institutions to offer forbearance to their clients.
Good policy.
Madam Speaker, the government of Jamaica responded with the $20 billion CARE program, which quickly became the largest social program in Jamaica's history. The program was conceptualized, developed, and launched in only a few weeks, and was a collaborative effort across ministries, departments, and agencies. We had our first COVID-19 case on March 10th, and as I mentioned, the CARE program was announced on March 24th in my closing budget presentation. Madam Speaker, I'd like to recognize the hard-working and dedicated ladies and gentlemen of several agencies and departments. First, the committed and dedicated staff at the Ministry of Finance and Public Service who coordinated the CARE program. Second, eGov Jamaica Limited, who developed and managed a portal. The young men and women there worked nights and on weekends and did not stop in order to launch on time, to maintain the application and to respond to queries. Third, Madam Speaker, the Accountant General's Department, who administered the payments. We had challenges with the number of persons without bank accounts and those with accounts which were invalid at the time of applying, and the department worked hard to address and overcome those challenges. Fourth, Madam Speaker, Tax Administration Jamaica, who played a critical role in validating applications. And fifth, Madam Speaker, I want to personally recognize Mr. John Thompson, the project manager, who was a calm, organized, and dedicated leader. This core team, Madam Speaker, worked with the Ministry of Local Government, the Ministry of Transport and Mining, the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Support, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, and the Exim Bank in delivery of this historic CARE program. I'd like to thank them all. Madam Speaker, we also recognize the remittance companies Western Union and LASCO, who accepted much less than their usual fees to handle huge volumes. There were some hitches, but we were able to eventually resolve them. Now, Madam Speaker, on behalf of the people of Jamaica, I have to also thank the Auditor General's Department. The Auditor General Department provided the service of audit assurance, which is very important to the success of the program. In the execution of the CARE program, Madam Speaker, we did something novel. We asked the Auditor General to perform concurrent audits of the WeCare program. That is, to audit the program while it was being executed and before each batch of payments was made. So applications for each WeCare grant type were validated and then processed and batched for payment, subject to audit. And prior to the files being transferred to the Accountant General's Department for payment, the Auditor General's Department, which had access to the system and all of its data, audited the eligibility and validation and other processes and produced reports allowing for any errors to be identified and corrected prior to payment. Those reports were tabled in Parliament for the people's representatives to review and ask questions and for the world to see. This had the effect of slowing payments down, no doubt, because we had to process the grants sequentially. Compassionate grant, general grant, set cash, one at a time, and then batch by batch by batch. And this caused some delays and some backlash. But, Madam Speaker, the transparency of the process and the openness of the program to the highest level of immediate scrutiny provided the public confidence that allowed the program to scale in size. In this program, Madam Speaker, similarly situated Jamaicans had equal access to government benefits, which importantly did not depend on race or class or gender or political affiliation.
That's true.
Your care benefit did not depend on who you voted for. Your care benefits did not depend on whether you were a PNP or JLP or no P. If you were eligible and your identity could be established and you met the criteria, you could receive this benefit from the government. You applied online through your mobile phone or tablet or computer and you collected your benefit from the state. In the end, over 440,000 Jamaicans were able to benefit from one of a number of care grants through the WeCare digital portal. I'll be the first to admit, Madam Speaker, that it was not perfect, that there were glitches that we had to overcome, and areas that can be improved. However, Madam Speaker, there are some powerful lessons in the experience of the CARE program I'd like to share. The first, Madam Speaker, is that digital means of processing and delivery offer the opportunity for quick, efficient, rules-based, and scalable programs. As the Prime Minister is on record of saying, we must make the transition to a fully digital society. The potential benefits to Jamaica and Jamaicans are huge. So this is our goal and our mission. Madam Speaker, the second lesson is that the Member of Parliament and the local government councillors have a legitimate and important role to play in assisting the citizen to navigate the state bureaucracy to access benefits offered by the state. Without the role of the members of parliament, supported by councillors who helped to sign people up and made representation on their behalf when there were problems, the program would not have reached as many people, despite the convenience of the digital platform, and it would not have been as successful. The key is to ensure that the member of parliament or the councillor cannot unduly influence the results. And for that, a digital solution which is auditable and rules-based helps to achieve this. Madam Speaker, the third lesson to share is that openness and transparency in the use of public resources and open and transparent and equitable processes for the distribution of the resources of the state ultimately empower the state to do more for the people. It is a virtuous cycle. We remain committed, Madam Speaker, to making policy decisions that can provide greater openness and transparency and fairness in the distribution of government resources. That is our goal and our mission, and we aim to recover faster and stronger than before. Now, Madam Speaker, when we learn, we grow. And this is true whether at the level of the individual.
Members, the time allotted to the minister under the standing orders has expired. I seek the suspension of the standing orders to allow the minister. Very well. Go ahead.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the member's time be extended to allow him to complete the presentation that he has. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Yeah.
So it's always good, Madam Speaker, to distill the lessons learned from our significant or important experiences. For a young nation experiencing a painful shock, economic shock of historic proportions, it's useful to take stock and distill some of the main economic lessons so far. One lesson, Madam Speaker, at the policy level is the importance of having buffers that result from an awareness of risk. Economic shocks happen. Sometimes huge shocks happen. From time to time, we experience economic shocks arising from commodity price volatility or geopolitical tension, from social tensions, natural disaster, epidemics, pandemics. Sometimes, unfortunately, we experience more than one of these shocks at the same time. We had Hurricane Eta and Zeta in the middle of the pandemic. As a small, open, developing, and relatively undiversified economy, Jamaica is particularly vulnerable to a variety of economic shocks, and this is our reality. What has happened to us in the past is that economic shocks have set us back years or even decades. The economic shock in the 1970s, spiked originally by the spike in the price of oil, led to 6 years of economic decline between 1974 and 1980, or certainly 5 of those 6 years was decline, and it took us 14 years to recover to pre-crisis levels of economic output. The economic shock arising from the global financial crisis in 2008, so you look at the graphs, right? It takes you 2008, 2009, led to 3 years of economic decline, where the economy contracted for 11 out of 12 quarters, and it took us 10 years to recover to pre-crisis levels of output. Our recoveries, Madam Speaker, have taken too long. They have fit on a generational time scale, and we are determined to change that. That is our goal and our mission. The biggest hurdle on our development path since independence has been that as compared with more successful economies, our periods of economic expansion have been too short, which is why we celebrated the 19 quarters, which was the record when it happened, right? Because our periods of unbroken economic expansion have been too short, while our experiences of economic declines have been too long, by way of comparison. Proverbially, moving 2 steps forward and 1 step back. If you move 2 steps forward and 1 step back, it takes you 3 times as long to reach your destination. It's like building a house and you lay 3 bricks and 2 slip off, and you lay another 3 bricks and 2 slip off again. If every time you lay 3 bricks, 2 slip off, the house not going to finish for now. What you want to do is to build a house brick by brick by brick, steadily. When you build a house steadily, Madam Speaker, brick by brick, rain or shine, Madam Speaker, the resources become available to sustain the levels of social investment that can counter the decay and erosion of Jamaica's social fabric. Madam Speaker, our biggest challenge is to fundamentally change our approach. The economic cycle of expansion and decline is an internal condition of mankind. We will always have periods of economic decline, but what we want, the periods of economic decline and recovery to be shorter and shorter, and our periods of economic expansion to be longer and longer. That is, we want to have quick economic recoveries. We have made it our mission from the very outset of this crisis to defy our history and, relative to this history, to have the quickest recovery from our worst economic crisis. Now, how do we ensure that economic expansions last longer and our declines are shorter? First, our policies must incorporate the reality of the economic risk we face. We must ensure that we are always adequately prepared. For the foreseeable future, we will remain vulnerable to the economic impact of commodity price shocks and natural disaster events and geopolitical tensions. We must always, therefore, have buffers, Madam Speaker, and we should never, ever have the cupboard empty. Second, we must continue to prioritize and preserve macroeconomic stability. That is, the policies and institutions that are consistent with low inflation, adequate foreign exchange reserves, financial sector stability, and debt sustainability. Madam Speaker, the most powerful lesson, though, is that through disciplined policy choices and effective implementation, we have the capacity to bring into reality the Jamaica we want. The most powerful lesson, Madam Speaker, is that we have agency and that we are, in fact, with God's help, in control of our destiny. Jamaica's history includes hundreds of years of colonization and domination. And through the persistent forces of history, we sometimes subtly adopt, embrace, and internalize and pass on an identity where our existential frame is that things happen to us. I just saw it go. I just saw the thing set. That is, we act sometimes as if we are not in control, as if there are forces at work that are too big for us to confront. Madam Speaker, Marcus Mosiah Garvey did not think like that. Neither did Norman Manley or Alexander Bustamante, nor any of our national heroes. And it was Jesus himself who warned us in the parable of the talents. Jesus rejected the man in the parable who was given 1 talent, but who lacked the vision and was too afraid because he thought he could not transform his environment. So far, we have weathered this crisis better than others, Madam Speaker, and than in the past as well, though it's the worst economic crisis in our history. Not by magic, but because of policy choices that we as an independent people have made. With that as my reference, Madam Speaker, and in the spirit of the parable I referred to you, I say to my fellow Jamaicans that with God's help and with disciplined policy choice, we as a nation can bend the future to our will. Madam Speaker, we can win and we will win. That is our goal and that is our mission. Madam Speaker, we're modernizing our economy brick by brick, which will make our recovery more resilient. We are modernizing and building our institutional framework with greater transparency in monetary policy making, fiscal policy making, and public investment execution that will empower the state to deliver more for the people of Jamaica. While our peers are scrambling to finance budgets, we have been looking ahead to build and strengthen institutions that safeguard our economic stability, lengthen the economic cycle, and shorten the periods of economic recovery. During the year that passed, we passed the Bank of Jamaica Amendment Act that paves the way for the modernization of our central bank. Now, this legislation, Madam Speaker, benefited from and was strengthened by deliberations of a joint select committee of both houses of Parliament, consisting of government members and opposition members. And I recognize the contribution of the opposition to that bill. Madam Speaker, we met on weekends as required, with some stunting drama on at least one occasion.
Repeat that. So what?
We did have some stunting drama one Saturday at the Bank of Jamaica. I don't know where Rhoda was on that occasion. But we got the job done. And I'd like to thank and recognize the contribution of members of the Joint Select Committee. Madam Speaker, the modernized Bank of Jamaica will have as its clear mandate price stability and the targeting of inflation. And given our tortuous history of high runaway inflation, we have empowered a well-resourced institution to keep inflation low, stable, and predictable. And relative to our history, that is how it has been for the past 6 years. Madam Speaker, the Act strengthens the capitalization, governance, transparency, and accountability of the central bank. Anticipating the passage of the Act, we injected $20 billion of permanent capital, that's capital that cannot be removed, into the central bank in 2018. This will be the first public institution in Jamaica with staggered board appointments, such that the entire board cannot be replaced in a single political administration, thereby providing long-term institutional stability. Responsibility for monetary policy decisions is devolved to the Monetary Policy Committee. And in a revolutionary nod to policy transparency, the minutes of these meetings will be made available to the public. For the first time, Madam Speaker, the Governor will account to the people of Jamaica and the Parliament through regular appearances before the Standing Finance Committee. And the government will no longer be able to, on the whim of the Minister of Finance, borrow money from the central bank through printing of money. No more of that, Madam Speaker. No more run with it. The Minister will have to do so transparently, seeking the affirmative consent of the House and only in national emergencies. Critically importantly, it removes the power of the Minister of Finance to give directions on monetary policy. Madam Speaker, we're giving the central bank a job to do, we're empowering the central bank to do it, and we're giving them the operational independence to get the job done, and providing the framework for parliamentarians on behalf of the people to hold them to account on achievement of those objectives. Madam Speaker, I therefore have the pleasure of announcing today that I'll be taking steps to bring the Bank of Jamaica Amendment Act into effect on the 16th of April 2021, and as of that date, the Bank of Jamaica will be an operationally independent central bank accountable to the Parliament. So my fellow Jamaicans, consistent with our desire for longer economic cycles with longer periods of economic expansion and shorter periods of contraction, we are decoupling the monetary policy cycle from the political cycle. With price stability being the central bank's objective now and into the future, and with the central bank having the power and independence to pursue that objectives with transparency and accountability, households and businesses and investors will make longer-term decisions and more longer-term commitments, which will deepen financial markets, widen the pool of products available, increase financial inclusion, broaden opportunity, and strengthen our economy. Madam Speaker, we passed legislation to create the Independent Fiscal Council Commission, which will be the guardian and interpreter of Jamaica's fiscal rules. Madam Speaker, with the assistance of the IDB, we're the first country in CARICOM to launch a public investment map that provides easy access, up-to-date online information on the progress of public investment projects on the government's capital budget. The platform gives citizens the opportunity to search for projects based on sector, parish, country, and provides opportunity for feedback. Citizens can upload photographs, they can compliment the progress, they can criticize, or they can comment. And, Madam Speaker, they'll be able to see how much has been spent, whether it's behind or ahead. And as we program larger and larger capital budgets, this becomes important, and as the economy recovers. Greater transparency in execution of Jamaica's public investment projects will further incentivize policymakers, civil servants, private sector contractors to ensure the best possible outcomes consistent with policy and contractual objectives. Madam Speaker, having signed our intent to join the Open Government Partnership in 2016, we formally launched the engagement chapter in January 2021. And the OGP is a forum of 70 countries whose governments are committed to more open, transparent, accountable policies and to be more responsive to citizens. By July, our first national action plan should be available. Madam Speaker, natural disaster risk is a risk with which we must contend and prepare for. This is why I'm such a keen proponent of having a comprehensive disaster risk financing strategy in order to reduce the fiscal risk of natural disasters. The fiscal risk of natural disaster comes into sharper focus given the historic nature of the COVID-19 pandemic. We certainly cannot leave ourselves completely exposed to the fiscal risk of natural disasters, especially during the time period that we're going to be recovering from the pandemic. Earlier, I recognized the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility for providing $500 million as a result of the damage caused by Hurricane Eta and Zeta. We would have been happy had the storm not happened, but it's good to know that our disaster risk strategy is working. Madam Speaker, the World Bank is working with Jamaica to issue a 3-year catastrophe bond to allow Jamaica to transfer some of our hurricane risk to international capital markets in time for the 2021 hurricane season. The CAT bond has been underpinned by analytical work, and the design and preparation of the instrument has been ongoing since early 2020. However, on the advice of the World Bank, the market placement was put on hold in 2020 due to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, as the pandemic induced significant price volatility to CAT bond pricing. With technical advice from the World Bank and with grant funding from the governments of the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and Germany, and the latter two through the GRIF facility, Jamaica is set to tap international capital markets for the issuance of the very first catastrophe bond ever issued by any Caribbean government. Under the CAT bond, Jamaica will pay annual premiums funded by grants from the GRIF facility, USAID, and Canada over the first 3 years. And in the event of a hurricane above a particular threshold, in any of those 3 years, the bond will pay out the principal amount to Jamaica. To ensure that CAT bond payouts will be spent in a manner consistent with the objective of mitigating the impact of natural disaster, the CAT bond payouts will flow to a National Disaster Risk Fund to be created out of the Contingencies Fund through an amendment of the Financial Administration and Audit Act, subject to the advice of the Attorney General's Chambers. Madam Speaker, the World Bank is providing technical assistance to this project, and good and disciplined policy implies that we think about tomorrow as well as today. Madam Speaker, we recently passed the Microcredit Act during the year, which brings the microcredit sector, the same-day loan sector, the payday loan sector, and similar businesses under the regulatory supervision of the Bank of Jamaica. This will ensure that these services operate within an environment of transparency and accountability, and that the operations of these services are not used to facilitate financial crimes. Under the bill, all providers of microcredit services, as defined under the Act, will be required to be appropriately licensed. Importantly, the Microcredit Act introduces consumer protection provisions for the Jamaican consumer. many Jamaicans take out loans with payday loan providers, with same-day loan providers, and with other microcredit institutions. With the passage of the Microcredit Act, the government is protecting all of these borrowers. The Microcredit Act makes it an offense for any payday lender, same-day lender, or microcredit institution to employ intimidation or violence or threats of violence in collection activities. Madam Speaker, we are modernizing Jamaica's economic legislative framework. Madam Speaker, as at December 2020, there were 25 credit unions operating in Jamaica with assets of $137 billion, representing 7% of GDP, and with membership in excess of 1 million Jamaicans. These facts make the credit union sector systemically important to financial system stability. This year, we intend to fully bring the credit union sector under the supervision and regulation of the central bank. The vital importance of the formal supervisory role of the BOJ was on display this year when the central bank, in the context of the pandemic, found it necessary to also make liquidity available to the credit union sector. The BOJ is in a stronger position to be the lender of last resort if it exercises a supervisory function with respect to credit unions and is familiar with the detailed financial operations of entities. In addition, under central bank supervision, savings within the credit union sector would be insured under the Jamaica Deposit Insurance Scheme. So, Madam Speaker, we have vested the Bank of Jamaica with oversight for overall financial system stability, and it is important that we therefore provide the opportunity to discharge that function by not having a major deposit-taking sector sitting outside of its supervisory reach. For this reason, Madam Speaker, we will be advancing two companion pieces of legislation, the Credit Union Special Provisions Bill and the Cooperative Societies Amendment Bill, during the upcoming fiscal year as we seek to modernize Jamaica's economic and legislative framework. Madam Speaker, Jamaica is an open economy that depends heavily on trade of goods and services. A vast majority of economic activity in Jamaica has some nexus with an airport or cargo terminal or a cruise port. As a result, trade in goods and services represents in excess of 70% of GDP. As such, Madam Speaker, the act to repeal and replace the Customs Act tabled by this government is critical to economic recovery and to recovering stronger. This act replaces the 1945 Customs Act and modernizes many steps, procedures, and requirements to be consistent with 21st century commerce. The law also makes many aspects of the logistics sector easier, more efficient, and more competitive. Passage of this act is therefore likely to incentivize increased investment in this growing and crucial sector. The bill benefited from extensive consultations prior to tabling, and I hope for efficient deliberations by the Joint Select Committee. We will eventually pass the act to repeal and replace the Customs Act, and Jamaica will recover even stronger. Madam Speaker. The other thing, man, we are embracing reform with ambition as we seek to recover faster and stronger. Consistent, Madam Speaker, with the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force report, the Government of Jamaica views accelerated transition to a digital society and economy as vital to our economic recovery and to recovering stronger than before. The government's digital strategy spans many ministries of government. Today, I'll speak to the government's digital strategy with respect to the economy. The delivery of grants through the CARE program exposed the vast number of Jamaicans who remain unbanked. They either do not have a bank account or the one that they have is not functional. The government is concerned about the size of the unbanked population. Access to financial services is essential to improving productivity and well-being. There are individual benefits to the individual, and there are spillover benefits to the rest of society. With recent innovations in technology, it is possible to introduce alternatives to cash that are cheaper, that are more secure, and that are more efficient and offer the prospect of increasing competition and greatly improving the financial inclusion of our society. It is therefore the policy of this government, Madam Speaker, to introduce a central bank digital currency, which has been conceptualized by the Bank of Jamaica, who is leading its implementation. The central bank digital currency is a form of central bank issued currency which is legal tender and is not to be confused with cryptocurrency, which is privately issued and not backed by a regulatory authority. Central bank digital currency is the real thing, backed by the central bank in Jamaica, just like the Jamaican dollars and the legislative underpinnings of central bank digital currency. It's the same money. It's interchangeable with Jamaican dollars cash, right? And it will be underpinned by the Bank of Jamaica Act. As legal tender, central bank digital currency can be exchanged on a one-on-one basis with physical cash, and households and businesses will be able to use central bank digital currency to make payments and to store value at no cost. That's right. The Bank of Jamaica will issue central bank digital currency to deposit-taking institutions, to authorized payment providers, as now obtains, the same way they issue cash. And these institutions, as well as telecom providers, will onboard unbanked customers. Agents will have the ability to onboard customers onto the platform, and they would own their central bank digital currency. And customers can top it up as well through their authorized agent or through a smart ABM. And customers can do business with other people directly using central bank digital currency and phone-to-phone merchants. So, Madam Speaker, this will bring the benefits of financial inclusion to tens of thousands of Jamaicans, which is the Prime Minister's dream, Madam Speaker. You're going to be able to pay for the Sky Juice, Madam Speaker, with your phone. And the Sky Juice vendor can take the digital currency that you pay for with the phone and use it to buy snacks from the vendor on her way home. Madam Speaker, the pan chicken man will be able to get, with digital currency on his phone, that he'll be able to use what he gets from the pan chicken stall and buy school book from the store, Madam Speaker. The potential exists for the NIS pensioner to not have to join long line at the post office. She will be able to receive her NIS pension on her phone and use it to buy goods and buy groceries and transfer some of it to the little children. Buy medication at the pharmacy. Madam Speaker, with central bank digital currency, we're thinking for everybody, and we'll be bringing more people into the financial system. It will allow for more innovation in financial services and provide the foundation for the digital transformation of the Jamaican economy. Now, Madam Speaker, if you think this is a dream, we are embracing reform with ambition, Madam Speaker. The Cabinet approved the procurement for the system yesterday. And the central bank digital currency will be piloted this year, ending in December 2021. And in 2022, Madam Speaker, central bank digital currency will be a reality in Jamaica. Now, operationalizing central bank digital currency will require some amendments to the Bank of Jamaica Act, because we have to amend the BOJ Act to give the Bank of Jamaica the sole right to issue digital currency, just like how now the central bank is the only institution that can legally issue Jamaican cash. Right? So we have to go and make that legal amendment. So the central bank will have the same position that they have with notes and coins with digital currency. So, Madam Speaker, we're serious about economic recovery. The Prime Minister set up the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Task Force with thoughtful intent, and we are assiduously moving to implement the recommendations. By transitioning to a digital society, Jamaica will recover stronger. We are modernizing the Jamaican economy, Madam Speaker, modernizing with ambition. Madam Speaker, in any society, the tax system is a powerful tool of policy that shapes investment and consumption choices as well as outcomes. The tax system also provides revenues for the government, which are necessary for the delivery of public services and development of the country. We will be seeking to operationalize a large industry scale projects and pioneer industry incentive framework. Sorry, I said that wrong. The large scale projects and pioneer industry incentive framework with amendments to that act and the passage of the relevant regulations that are necessary for the act to serve the purpose of attracting large investments, billion-dollar US dollar investments. The original bill was passed in 2014 but has never been used. Now more than ever, we need to attract large-scale investments, each worth billions of United States dollars. But ideally, any inducements that are available to attract these large-scale and pioneer investments must be rules-based. They must be equally and openly available to all who can meet this criteria. They must be measurable in terms of the cost, and they must be transparent. With the eventual passage of the amended Large-Scale and Pioneer Industry Act, Jamaica will attract large-scale investment in Jamaica, and Jamaica will recover stronger. Madam Speaker, the last 12 months have reminded us that we can plan, but we cannot always predict.
That's true.
We have to live with a certain amount of uncertainty. That's just life. So, Madam Speaker, this puts pressure on us as leaders, and indeed as a country, to do an even better job to exercise control over the things we can. And we have some important work to do, Madam Speaker, with our income tax regime. Currently, the Income Tax Act requires that returns for any calendar year of assessment will be delivered on or before the 15th day of March in the year following such year of assessment. Each return of income, the form that taxpayers submit to the government, requires the taxpayer to include a statement of the tax chargeable on that income under the Income Tax Act and to indicate how much, if any, of that tax remains unpaid. The Act further requires that the tax so indicated as unpaid is due on the 15th day of March. I want you to listen to me carefully. 15th day of March in the year following the assessment. Now, Madam Speaker, the current March 15th date places the collection of a substantial portion of annual income tax into the very last 2 weeks of the fiscal year. As much as 50% of the annual income tax revenue is collected in the last 2 weeks of March as a result of this rule, making the last month of the fiscal year the highest yielding month of the year. Now, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we come, we see it, 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 we come, we see it. And we're not done. It's obviously suboptimal because it places the government at a disadvantage in terms of managing the fiscal operations to ensure that fiscal targets are met by this time, and the budgeted expenditures have been dispersed. However, Madam Speaker, what happens by March 15th? All the warrants have been signed, and the budget has already been dispersed, and you're sitting down, and you're just hoping that what you had projected is coming through. That can't be the way to run a modern economy. It cannot. It has always been suboptimal. It has always been a source of risk in Jamaica's fiscal management. This is a problem for Jamaica, but we can fix it. And we're going to fix it. Madam Speaker, in the United States, the fiscal year begins on October 1, and the income taxes are due April 15th, in the middle of the year, not the last 2 weeks of the year. In Canada, the fiscal year, like ours, begins on April 1st, and income taxes are due on April 30th, in the first month of the fiscal year, not the last. In the United Kingdom, the fiscal year begins on April 6th, and income taxes are due January 31st, in the middle of the fiscal year, not at the very end. It does not make, and has never made practical sense, for the date of filing income tax in Jamaica to be 15 days before the fiscal year ends. Madam Speaker, we all know that the keys to the barn door are considerably less useful after the horse has already bolted. So subject to further consultations, to improve the effectiveness of the fiscal operations, the government intends to make the bold but practical step of changing the annual income tax return and collection date from March 15th of each year to April 15th, or some other date that we agree on after consultation, Madam Speaker. This change is not just good for the planning of the government finances. This change will provide taxpayers with an additional month to prepare their tax return and to organize themselves. But for the government, it will mean that the Revenue Authority now collects upfront 50% of its annual income tax in the first month of the fiscal year. This will enhance fiscal responsibility, Madam Speaker. It will give the government the ability to take any corrective action that may be required across the remaining 11 months. So if the thing comes in lower than you expect, you have 11 months. The fiscal year, Madam Speaker, should revenues fall, this will greatly improve fiscal management and the ability of government to meet its annual fiscal balance target. Madam Speaker, it's a simple change. Simple, but it has powerful impact. Madam Speaker, policy matters.
Yes.
And good policy, Madam Speaker, matters even more. We are modernizing the Jamaican economy, which will lead to a stronger recovery.
That's the problem, Nigel. It's simple. Because it's simple, it's a problem to them.
Yeah. Now, we are going to do this. Obviously, that change would have to take place effective the following year because the budget is already cast.
That is correct.
Okay? You're listening, Julian? Madam Speaker, historically, a significant number of Jamaican corporate entities have strategically migrated corporate head offices, corporate functions, or incorporated holding companies in other jurisdictions outside of Jamaica to maximize shareholder benefits. In doing so, these businesses have done what businesses do, which is to operate within the existing legal framework to maximize shareholder value. Now, the advantages prevailing in some of these offshore jurisdictions provided ample justification for the migration of corporate entities to other jurisdictions, including to some of our Caribbean neighbors. Following the 2008 global financial crisis, however, G20 countries, some of the richest countries in the world, began to focus on revenue loss in their own jurisdictions as a result of G20 domicile taxpayers leveraging what these entities had to offer. And this brought about the inclusive framework, which includes over 137 jurisdictions and the base erosion and profit shifting initiative. There are lessons that developing countries, such as Jamaica, can learn from the experience. Some of the ideas and principles that are good for the G20 can also be wise and prudent for Jamaica. Now, the BEPS initiative resulted in many offshore jurisdictions, including those in our neighborhood, being peer-reviewed, and most were declared to be conducting harmful tax practices. The peer review reports reflect that the profits in some of those jurisdictions were inconsistent with activity being conducted there. This resulted in a major legislative reform being recommended by the inclusive framework and adopted by these offshore jurisdictions. And this reform has largely resulted in the evaporation of the advantages, and the initial justification for the migration of corporate entities is not as it was before. Madam Speaker, we want these companies, or at least those activities, or both, to come back home to our shores, Madam Speaker. The objective of what we're going to call a reverse corporate inversion initiative is to have these parent companies or these entities relocate to Jamaica, thus broadening the tax base and strengthening our economy. However, we are aware that other jurisdictions are competing for the same entities, looking for a new home, and Jamaica wants to ensure that there are no intractable barriers to those who wish to return. There's therefore need for a detailed review of the rules, regulations, and costs associated with companies desirous of relocating to Jamaica to ensure that we are competitive on this front. In conducting this review of our laws and administrative processes, we must be guided by international best practices on business facilitation, as well as the guidelines on harmful tax practices promulgated by the Inclusive Framework and the OECD. I know it's necessary though. Jamaica must therefore find a way to encourage the return of these entities within the scope of international best practices without any negative economic implications. There is an existing working group that's looking on venture capital and private equity, and I will ask them to also examine these issues, and I'm told they have been actually examining them even independent of me saying it, to examine these issues and to make recommendations to the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Madam Speaker, the world is changing when it comes to taxation. Jamaica cannot stand still. It is not in our interest to stand still. The key now is to plan for the change and to make the change fair to our businesses while preserving our revenue base and adhering to global practices and principles of tax compliance. Madam Speaker, we want our companies to come back home. Madam Speaker, the Income Tax Act has been in existence from 1954 and is largely based on the UK Income Tax Act of 1952. Since 1952, the United Kingdom has repealed and replaced their principal income tax legislation many times, including in 1988 with the passage of their Income and Corporations Taxes Act, and then 20 years after that, they repealed and replaced again with the Income Tax Act of 2007 and the Corporation Act of 2010. And we have been hobbling for, how much is that? Enough years, 70 years. 70 years with the 1952 Income Tax Act. While Britain has reimagined and upgraded and modernized its regime several times over. Amendments have been made in Jamaica, no doubt. However, these have been ad hoc and they've been characterized by a reactionary approach to policy development, resulting in overlapping provisions and general incoherence in the Act. Madam Speaker, on the face of it, the issues we face, Madam Speaker, is that over many years we've entered into international treaties over many years to try and boost trade and to make Jamaica attractive for global investment. Some of these were done on a piecemeal basis without reference to wider principles of sustainable tax policy. And with the passage of time, there's now little or no codification of Jamaica's overall international tax policy, resulting in a dissonance between what is enshrined in those treaties and what is provided for in the Act, and what is necessary to protect our tax base. Often the amendments have to play catch-up with the treaties. An example as well, Madam Speaker, even now we're seeing where the likes of Amazon and Google and Facebook, who do business in our environment, who earn revenues and make money, but the Jamaican Treasury is none the better for it. Other institutions are introducing digital sales taxes and so forth, something that we can't do alone. We're pursuing a multilateral approach to that, and there's a multilateral group of countries that includes countries like Jamaica that is working together to see how best to resolve that in a multilateral approach. Now, with respect to the modernization, Madam Speaker, with the passage of time, there's little or no codification of Jamaica's overall international tax policy. Now, the world is a fundamentally different place than it was back in 1954. And for Jamaica to be competitive to investment and talent, we must have a modern income tax regime that also protects Jamaica's tax base. Madam Speaker, we are on a mission to modernize the Jamaican economy. We are on a mission to pursue reform with ambition, Madam Speaker. And the process of reviewing our Income Tax Act will begin this year. It will be a multi-year process. However, there's no better time to begin than at this economic trough. Madam Speaker, we will be engaging our multilateral partners for technical advice as we seek to bring in a more modern regime as Jamaica seeks to recover faster and stronger. Madam Speaker, there are a number of multinational enterprises that are interested in investing to build large hotels that are enabled with casino gaming activities. We intend to amend the casino gaming legislation to be compatible with its interests and thereafter to launch a request for proposals that will eventually, but not immediately, lead to large hospitality investments in Jamaica. With the eventual passage of the amendments to the casino gaming legislation, Jamaica will recover stronger. We have the Minister of Tourism will tell you that there are a number of investors who are in the waiting room, waiting for this amendment to be passed, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the recent COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharper focus the need to have a public sector that is more responsive, efficient, and effective. The reality is the public sector touches every citizen in some way, shape, or form. And so it must be able to anticipate and meet, if not exceed, the expectations of citizens. I'm pleased to advise this Honourable House that 10 years after it was first proposed in the Master Rationalisation Plan under the Bruce Golding administration, and when the Honourable Audley Shaw was Minister of Finance and the Public Service, we have commenced, so it's their idea, and we have now commenced the introduction of shared corporate services in the public sector as a way of improving operations of government. This is historic in the government of Jamaica, Madam Speaker. We have commenced the pilot with internal audit and will shortly begin with human resource management. This will support realization of the economies of scale by consolidating the execution of the administrative functions in ministries, departments, and agencies under one entity. This will not only save the government operational costs, but also better use information and communications technology so that public sector employees can focus on the core functions, resulting in much higher levels of external customer service. The government will eventually introduce shared corporate services in 7 areas: human resource management, finance and accounts, asset management, procurement, information communication technology, and public relations and communications. Madam Speaker, we have rationalized 40 public entities since the start of the rationalization project in 2017. At the start of the project, we had 190 public bodies, and we are now at 150, with the plan to further streamline through mergers, closures, divestments, and integration into parent ministries. I should note, Madam Speaker, that the general function does not go away, but rather the service is delivered in a more efficient and cost-effective manner. We are transforming, Madam Speaker, the human resource management because we recognize its vital importance to how we attract, manage, and retain employees. In this regard, Madam Speaker, plans are well advanced for the implementation of a new model of HR by the public sector. Simultaneously, we're introducing a comprehensive HR management system and payroll system to better manage employee data and wage bills. 36 ministries, departments, and agencies are now using this software, and our goal is that within 2 to 3 fiscal years, 85 public sector entities will be brought onto that software platform that allows the employee to request salary letters, to see what their entitlements for vacation are, to do things that today takes weeks and months because employment records are not digitized. And this will also enable, when those employees retire, for their pension payment to come 1 month after their last salary payment. Madam Speaker, the implementation of the Government of Jamaica's ICT infrastructure has commenced, and 50 government entities have been identified for Phase 1. Minister Vaz will speak more on this when he makes his contribution. We have implemented a modern web-based work permit system through the Transformation Initiative at the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, upgraded ICT infrastructure at the Child Protection and Family Services agencies, and acquired and implemented a new client relationship management system at the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency. I don't know if anybody has experienced it recently. We are modernizing our public sector technology infrastructure to improve efficiency, to reduce costs, and improve service delivery to the Jamaican people. Madam Speaker, the final pillar of public sector transformation deals with public sector compensation. It is widely known that the compensation system in the public sector has evolved into a complex one, with a variety of salary scales derived from the use of several different job evaluation methodologies in the one public sector. So the current structure has resulted in both real and perceived inequities, and also created ad hoc incremental costs for different groups. So people performing the same function in different parts of the public sector are scored differently and are paid differently. A stenographer working in Parliament is paid differently from the stenographer in the court system. A medical doctor working in the prisons is paid differently from a medical doctor working at the hospital. They have the same qualifications, they have the same experience. But that is because we have multiple job evaluation systems in our public service. When the Ministry of Finance did its review in 2017, it found that there was a proliferation of allowances, over 185 of them all, and were originally designed to supplement salaries as a way to deal with that high inflationary period we went through, not wanting to put it on salaries, so we just introduced new allowances. And for some groups in the public sector, allowances represent between 30% and 60% of total compensation. Now, a structure with 185 allowances is unwieldy and it's complex, and it has disadvantages for the employee. When they retire, the salary on which their pension is based is suboptimal. Right? In December 2019, the government contracted with international consulting firm Ernst & Young to work with us to establish a more rational and sustainable compensation system. In December 2020, a year later, the Transformation Implementation Unit, along with Ernst & Young, submitted a proposal. And among the key recommendations were a single common factor-based job evaluation system for the entire public sector that provides a consistent basis for comparison across the public service. We may not have the resources to pay people at skyrocketed levels, but at least we can have internal equity. It's the lack of internal equity that causes the worst of the grievances, Madam Speaker. The second recommendation is to move to a common pay grading structure where all jobs throughout the public service, throughout the civil service, public agencies, education, i.e. teaching service, protective services, will be aligned into a single set of bands. Today we have 325 job scales. SG1, SG7, EY6, etc., etc. CSG2, 325 of them that don't communicate with each other. Just by way of comparison, a much larger country than our own, and we just look to the UK as an example, the United Kingdom, which is what, 20 times our size, 25 times our size. In the Treasury Department, I just looked at my ministry to ministry, they have 5 grades and 2 at executive level, 7 in all. At the Ministry of Finance, we have almost 30. And 325 in the whole, right, for this much smaller country. So what we want to do is, Madam Speaker, the recommendation is a single common pay grading structure across the public service that is consistent and fair and transparent. There's a proposal for the introduction of pay for performance to recognize and reward high performance and excellent performance. And there is the recommendation for the rationalization and consolidation of allowances into basic pay where possible, resulting in a simpler, more transparent approach to total compensation. Madam Speaker, the work that they did evaluated approximately 500 benchmark jobs. So they took 500 jobs from across the public sector at all levels, from all areas. And they compared those jobs with what central government had, what public bodies had, and what private sector entities who volunteered to be a part of it, of the survey, where they were. And Madam Speaker, we're seeking to implement a system that's based on 4 key principles. That is simple and easy to understand. Just a few grades. Going on to 5 is not going to be feasible for us, but certainly a number that you can remember all of the grades. You should be able to remember them. And when you hear, right? So simple and easy to understand. Consistent with equitable application and transparency across the entire public sector that recognizes and rewards performance, and that's sustainable, meaning it's affordable, it's manageable, it's defensible, and it supports the realization of our strategic goals. Madam Speaker, I've advised this Honourable House before, when the budget was tabled, that due to the fiscal pressures brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, we will need to delay the implementation of the compensation review until the next fiscal year, 2022-2023. However, we are going to use this year to work with our partners in the union to ensure that when the following year comes around, we can implement. There's a lot of detail to work through, a lot of conversation, and so forth. And we want to use this year to be in a position that next year we can press this execute button and get this implemented. Madam Speaker, we recognize that there have been various attempts to deal with compensation in the public sector before, many starts and stops, and the fiscal position of the government was unable to sustain those previous attempts. I want to use this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to publicly express appreciation and gratitude to all public sector employees, Madam Speaker, for the sacrifices that they have endured over many years, Madam Speaker, and the excellent work that they continue to put out to keep this country going. We anticipate that as we enter into discussions with our employee representatives regarding compensation, there will be a general understanding among public sector workers and unions that given the imperatives before us at this time, the government can only accommodate a modest wage increases as we seek to address the public health situation and to address the imperatives of social and economic recovery, and therefore we propose to delay the implementation of the review to the following fiscal year. Madam Speaker, last year we launched a Marcus Garvey Graduate Scholarships for public sector employees, which is the largest scholarship program in Jamaica's history with a budget of $1 billion. The Marcus Garvey Graduate Scholarship will offer high-potential Jamaicans in the public sector the opportunity to obtain a graduate degree from competitive, appropriately accredited universities in areas that are aligned with the national goals and strategic objectives of Jamaica. The program constitutes the base of a pipeline of GOJ human capital development initiatives that will nurture the development of future leaders and executives in the public sector. Madam Speaker, the scholarship will offer 30 scholarships a year over the period of 5 years in various subject matters, including public sector governance, health, education, the built environment, and economics. The application for the first set of scholarships was opened between the beginning of September and the beginning of October last year, and the Secretariat received 185 applications. A blind peer review process is near completion, after which the selection committee, chaired by His Excellency the Governor General, will review shortlisted applicants and select the final awardees. We remain committed, Madam Speaker, to investing in the technical capacity and experience of the public sector. That is our goal and our mission as we prepare Jamaica to recover stronger. Madam Speaker, during the fiscal year, we increased the moratorium on the starting date of repayment of student loans from 6 months to 14 months after graduation, reflecting our commitment to provide greater flexibility and breathing room to our students. During the 2020-21 fiscal year, the Student Loans Bureau received almost 14,000 applications for student loans, an increase of 5% over the prior year. So we had an increase in applications despite the pandemic. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased that doesn't mean that everybody who applied and got through are going, some people have deferred enrollment, but the applications are up I'm pleased to report, Madam Speaker, that of all those 14,000 who applied, the vast majority, or 98%, were approved. Madam Speaker, over the past 5 years, we have lowered interest rates on student loans from as high as 12% to as low as 4% for some loans. And we have also forgiven portions of loans for persons working for registered charities. All of these measures were designed to improve accessibility. One hurdle that creates a disproportionate barrier to access for low-income families, however, is the need to find 2 guarantors in order to qualify for a student loan. Now, Madam Speaker, it is in the public interest that the goal of accessibility be balanced by the goal of sustainability. If we have accessibility but no sustainability, we're not thinking about tomorrow. Right? Madam Speaker, in trying to balance this equation between accessibility and affordability, effective April 1st, we will remove the need for 2 guarantors for student loans, and it will instead only require 1 guarantor for student loans, Madam Speaker, to broaden the access that lower income families have to student loans. When NIDS come in, we can do something else, right? When NIDS comes in. Yeah. Yeah. Madam Speaker, crafting the budget for this year has been extremely challenging. My fellow Jamaicans, I stand before you today humbled by the severity of the crisis. We're not alone in this global fight against the pandemic, and we're not alone in how we respond to our domestic needs. Every country in the world is going through a similar struggle and making painful choices. I've spent the last several months, thinking about this budget through every possible angle. The government's revenues, Madam Speaker, increase and decrease along with the size of our annual economic output. Due to the pandemic, the economy declined dramatically this fiscal year, and it has not yet recovered. As a result, the resources available to the government of Jamaica remain subdued and seriously constrained. Yet our expenses remain with us, and COVID-19 related expenses add to the pressure. Because of COVID-19, Madam Speaker, our healthcare costs have increased significantly. Our more drugs have been required. More personal protective equipment has been required. More employees have had to be added, including community health aides. In addition, increased hours and increased utilization of clinics and hospitals leads to increased usage of security services and canteen services, and portering services and cleaning services, and every service you can think of. Complicated matters even more, traditional sources of revenue for public bodies, particularly associated with tourism, have been affected. And the central government has had to support those public bodies. For example, the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency normally sustains its operations on the basis of fees related to people who are traveling, people getting passports, and other kinds of fees. Travel has dramatically reduced, and so their revenues are down, and they need central government support. The Urban Development Corporation is dependent on Duns River Falls for its revenues. I don't need to say any more. So we've had to support the UDC with, $700 million already in this budget.
See that fall off in the tourism revenue. That's the impact of it.
Madam Speaker, the National Water Commission's largest customers are the hotels, which now operate on a very low occupancies compared to the pre-pandemic levels. Their revenues have been affected and have had to seek support from the central government, and we have forwarded that support. Included in this budget, there's $3.4 billion of loans to the NWC, and so on. So with limited resources, Madam Speaker, prioritization is critically important. And when resources are severely limited, we have to prioritize within those priorities. Remember that our objective is to have shorter and shorter periods of decline and quicker periods of experiences of economic recovery and longer times of economic expansion. Inclusive of this quarter ending March 31st, where the PIOJ projects a 10% contraction in the economy, plus or minus, we are anticipating at least 5 consecutive quarters of economic decline. While we are not in control of all the variables, it is important that economic recovery begin in the upcoming fiscal year, starting this upcoming April to June quarter. But this depends critically on the evolution of the virus and on the public's compliance with the measures and whether any new measures are required to combat the virus. Our budget, within the severe limitations placed by the pandemic and in the context of the uncertainties and risks that we face, tries to align the objective of a quick and stable economic recovery with these realities. As I've remarked before, we have to see the environment for what it is. We are in the midst of a viciously dangerous economic crisis brought on by an equally crippling pandemic, and the wrong policy choices could prolong and could deepen its effects. On the positive side, however, the path out of the crisis is very clear, but it's a narrow path, meaning we cannot do everything and we have to prioritize. Our priorities for recovery include: 1, we need to ensure that we make adequate provisions to finance the procurement, the storage, the distribution, the application of vaccines required to reach herd immunity with respect to the coronavirus. 2, we need to ensure that we bolster social support to assist the vulnerable persons who are most affected by the pandemic. 3, we need to continue to finance the provision of the public goods on which our society and economy depends. 4, we need to be able to finance an infrastructure program that can boost economic activity. 5, we need to be able to provide support to small businesses. And 6, we have to preserve macroeconomic stability in our economy. For the upcoming fiscal year, the central government plans to spend a total of $830.8 billion, comprised of $541.3 billion of non-debt expenditure, $272.2 billion of debt service expenditure, loans to public bodies of $17.3 billion, Madam Speaker. The program's central government non-debt expenditure for financial year 21-22 reflects an increase of $23 billion, or 4.4%, relative to the non-debt third supplementary estimates of expenditure of $518.3 billion. And the central government non-debt expenditure consists of recurrent expenditure of $487.1 billion and capital expenditure of $54.2 billion. And in turn, the recurrent expenditure consists of compensation as well as recurrent programs. Compensation accounts for 49% of recurrent expenditures, inclusive of the amounts towards the adjustment in public sector wages and $1.8 billion to settle the arrears in employees' contribution to the National Housing Trust. The recurrent program allocation accounts for 50.9% of total recurrent expenditure and reflects a nominal increase of $6.4 billion, or 2.6% above the revised estimates. Notwithstanding the fiscal challenges, the government continues to prioritize expenditure to support the delivery of services to Jamaicans. Madam Speaker, pandemic or no pandemic, we continue to allocate the largest share of our budget outside of interest to education. $114 billion is allocated to education in the upcoming fiscal year, and education will represent approximately 21% of non-debt expenditure. So $1 out of every 5 that we spend on non-interest, non-debt expenditure goes to education. That is prioritization by the Jamaican state, Madam Speaker. Now, expressing it another way, Jamaica will spend close to 6% of GDP on education. Let me say it again. Jamaica will spend 6% of GDP on education. Now, when you look at the international literature, I had a conversation with Emeritus Professor Orlando Patterson, who is the longest tenured professor at Harvard University, a Jamaican, and who the Prime Minister has appointed as chairman of the Education Review Commission. And he read my budget speech last year when I spoke about education, and he said, gave me additional information. Madam Speaker, the 6% of GDP that we spend on education is in the upper echelons in the world, Madam Speaker. It is more than Singapore spends on education. They spend 4% of GDP on education. It is more than, 3% rather. It is more than our peer group. Jamaica falls in the group of what they call upper middle income countries, people who have our level of per capita GDP. And the data for upper middle income countries that they spend an average of 4% of GDP on education. Now, Madam Speaker, it's a bipartisan effort because the Review Commission in 2004, like the Review Commission this year, has had the input of persons from both sides of the aisle. And there's been a bipartisan commitment to get the spending levels up. But, Madam Speaker, it is deserving of note that in the worst health crisis in 100 years, Jamaica continues to place education as its #1 priority expenditure. Under the leadership of the Minister of Education, Honorable Favourable Williams, by the end of this school year, June 2021, the government of Jamaica will have distributed a total of 122,831 digital devices to pass and non-pass needy students at a cost of $3.9 billion. And this includes an amount of $805 million allocated in the fiscal year beginning April 1st. Madam Speaker, a few years ago, the government approached our multilateral partners to assist us with a public expenditure review with respect to education to help us optimize this allocation, because the problem is not the amount that we allocate. When you compare it with the world, you have to allocate from the resources that you have. And we're taking from our entire pool and allocating 6% of GDP, which is more than most countries in the world. So we have to review the allocation of expenditure, and we have to be prepared to be courageous and to have a mature discussion about how we allocate in order to improve outcomes. Because at the end of the day, it's the outcomes that matter. Madam Speaker, we continue to prioritize social spending, which is executed across various ministries. $14.5 billion is being allocated to the PATH program, the government's conditional cash program targeting vulnerable households. Of this amount, $8.5 billion is allocated to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security to support the PATH cash grant, which prior to this year was under the ministry's capital budget. Those activities were previously implemented under a public investment project supported by loan funds from a multilateral, and that's how it ended up on the capital side. From this year onwards, the PATH program will be on the recurrent side. And this amount of $8.5 billion will continue to support persons in vulnerable groups, the elderly, disabled, pregnant and lactating women, and children attending schools through cash transfers, post-secondary and tertiary education grants, and on-the-job training. Madam Speaker, $6 billion is allocated under the Ministry of Education and Youth and Information for the PATH school feeding program, $5.6 billion in the Ministry of Education for the school feeding program, and $0.4 billion for the PATH rural transportation program. In addition, Madam Speaker, $1.1 billion is being allocated under the Ministries of Education to support student nutrition programs, providing breakfast and cooked lunches. Now, remember, this is for the entire fiscal year. Okay? The entire fiscal year. So though for the immediate period, we are not meeting in person for certain grades, there's the full expectation that during the course of the fiscal year that will resume. Madam Speaker, $800 million is provided under the Ministry of Labour and Social Security to facilitate a social pension for the elderly. On this side, Madam Speaker, we on this side, and I hope shared over that side, we are passionate about that program. The very people who the NIS was set up for, don't even let me start. $800 million for the elderly. This is a total of $16.4 billion, Madam Speaker, on social support, before considering the additional social spending under the Jamaica Social Investment Fund in the Office of the Prime Minister and under the SERVE program, which I'll discuss in a few moments. This government remains committed to social protection and to supporting the most vulnerable in our society, Madam Speaker. That's our goal and our mission as we recover faster and stronger. Madam Speaker, other recurrent expenditure include $2.3 billion to support natural disaster risk management within central government. There's $1.1 billion for the issue of the catastrophe bond, and that $1.1 billion is financed by grant funding. And there are amounts of $1 billion to the CRIF, to the Caribbean Reinsurance Catastrophe Risk Reinsurance Facility, and $200 million is being transferred to the Contingencies Fund, in keeping with the requirements of the Financial Administration and Audit Act. So even in the pandemic, Madam Speaker, we're thinking about tomorrow, right? And we're transferring the $200 million. Yes, it's in the Act now. Right, but it was not even, let me not tell tales out of school, but we are transferring $200 million to the contingencies fund, even in these circumstances. And there's $50 million to the National Disaster Fund under the, managed by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. Madam Speaker, $8.8 billion is being allocated to the Ministry of Health and Wellness to acquire pharmaceuticals and medical supplies for the 4 regional health authorities, and this is in addition to the amounts to be allocated under the Serve Jamaica program, which I'll get to in a few moments. $2.9 billion, Madam Speaker, to the Ministry of Finance, representing a grant to the local government ministries, and by extension, municipal corporations, to cover the annual cost of street lights. I will always say it because it's not the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance. Right? It's supposed to be funded from property tax revenues. However, leave it at that. Madam Speaker, $1 billion has been allocated to the Statistical Institute to carry out preparatory activities for the undertaking of a national census in 2022. But this $1 billion has to be spent this year for the preparation activities. The last census was done in 2011, and we were scheduled to carry out one this year in 2021. But the pandemic meant we could not implement the activities required last year to prepare for it. And $700 million, Madam Speaker, has been allocated to provide an increase to benefits to existing government pensioners. Madam Speaker, capital expenditure in the new fiscal year is programmed at $54.2 billion. At first glance, one may be tempted to compare it with the $52 billion programmed in the third supplementary estimates for this fiscal year. But to do so would be to erroneously compare apples and oranges. The $52 billion for this fiscal year includes, as I mentioned earlier, $8.5 billion in path expenditure, which has always been on the capital side of the budget, which we're moving to the recurrent. So adjusting for this, an apples for apples comparison, Madam Speaker, means that effectively we're moving the capital budget from let's take it off, from $43.5 billion in the 2021 fiscal year to $54.2 billion, an increase of 20%, Madam Speaker. We're increasing the capital budget by 20%, even in the face of the unprecedented economic decline that we've faced, because we are prioritizing economic recovery within the resource envelope. When in the past, Madam Speaker, has Jamaica ever been in a crisis and responded by increasing the CapEx budget? To be clear, Madam Speaker, the capital budget would not have been able to be it would not have been remotely possible without the one-off dividend from the Bank of Jamaica. But be that as it may, we have increased the capital budget by 20%. Now, much of the capital expenditure is in the Serve Jamaica program, and I'll touch on that, Madam Speaker. But the CapEx outside of that includes $2.3 billion for the National Identification System, Madam Speaker, because we are prioritizing digital transformation. $1.3 billion for agricultural projects, including Essex Valley, Amity Hall, Bridge Pen, irrigation to boost output. Madam Speaker, $3.4 billion in Jamaica Social Investment Fund that the Prime Minister will tell you all about. $2.7 billion to the Ministry of Health and Works, including $1.3 billion to continue the works for the redevelopment of the Cornwall Regional Hospital. $3.2 billion to continue implementation of public sector transformation project, including modernization of the Bureau standards, ISO management system implementation, the new work permit system at the Ministry of Labour, and importantly, concluding the fiber optic network across the Kingston metropolitan area. $6.5 billion for projects in the National Security Ministry, including infrastructural works and new construction. $2.1 billion to support the build-out of Jamaica's cybersecurity capabilities, and $1.2 billion for projects within the Ministry of Education and Youth, including $800 million for the primary and secondary infrastructure program that will eventually remove and abolish the shift system from Jamaica. Very importantly, Madam Speaker, $1.9 billion to make the final payments on the 30 fire trucks being procured by the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. Madam Speaker, even in the pandemic, there will be no delay in the delivery of the fire trucks. Now, Madam Speaker, last year, good policy delivered $90 billion of opening cash resources at the right time. That assisted us greatly in financing the response to the pandemic, even as government revenues declined without the need to borrow. This year again, Madam Speaker, good policy is delivering a $33 billion dividend from the Bank of Jamaica, straight into the consolidated fund in the first week of April. This could not come, Madam Speaker, at a better time. And rarely, as I said before, are the fruits of right and appropriate policy as powerfully evident in a shorter time period. My fellow Jamaicans, policy matters, and good policy matters more. Without this historic dividend, Madam Speaker, unprecedented in size as a single payment, this year's budgetary process would have been even more difficult. And I did say I'd say a few more words so that we could understand where this dividend came from. And I have a graph that's been shown that shows the BOJ's annual profits or losses in red, and you'll see that prior to 2018, the BOJ had profit volatility and had years of losses. And if you go back to 2010, there would have been a huge loss in 2010 as well. In blue, it shows the accumulated amount that the government of Jamaica owed the Bank of Jamaica on account of those losses. And in the annual report of the BOJ, and this year's annual report has been tabled today just by chance, I had nothing to do with that, you can see all of these figures are from BOJ's annual reports, that the government of Jamaica would have owed the BOJ these amounts You know, I'm just looking at the graph. I don't have the number in front of me, but somewhere about 13 billion in 2011. The government owed them 20 odd billion in 2013. And this is owing them by law. By law, the government was required to pay these resources over to the BOJ. But for reasons that may be understood, but maybe not, because you could just pay securities. But that didn't, for whatever reason, that didn't happen. But the amounts kept getting higher. Now, central banks are designed to be profitable. And in currencies, and so what you see happening, and I'll get to it in my prepared text, and I'll come back to the graph. Central governments are designed to be profitable, and in countries that pursue good policies, sustainable and prudent policies, central banks are indeed profitable, and they return these profits to taxpayers through dividends to the Treasury. And these dividends can be used to fund social support and finance infrastructure and support other worthy initiatives through an open and transparent budgetary process where everyone can see where the resources of government are going and which groups are benefiting. When policy is pursued that results in the central bank making losses and then taxpayers are called upon to fund those losses, we know who bears the cost. You, the taxpayers of this country. But the question about who actually benefits is less clear and is usually not transparent. So examples of central bank dividends distributions include the Bank of England in the UK has routinely paid dividends of £500 million sterling to Her Majesty's Treasury over the period 2010 to 2019 annually. The Canadian Central Bank has paid dividends that average $1 billion Canadian dollars annually over the 10 years between 2010 and 2019. The Australian Central Bank has paid dividends that average $2 billion Australian dollars annually for the period 2010 to 2019. The Federal Reserve in the United States pays dividends every year to the US Treasury, and these dividends have averaged $75 billion US dollars every single year over the period 2010 to 2019. That is normal. Now, what about Jamaica? Over the period 2010 to up until now, we are in, the central bank has paid zero dividends to the taxpayer of Jamaica who fund its operations because it has made losses. Some of the losses were a result of JDX and NDX debt exchanges, but some, and a lot, were also due to foreign exchange losses from excessive intervention into FX markets. Over the period 2010 to 2017, taxpayers of this country were called upon to support the BOJ in an amount of over $31 billion because of losses incurred. Now, you can't hold an institution accountable if they're not provided with the resources specified and detailed by law. All of those negative things in blue. The law says that when BOJ makes a loss, the government must cover that loss with taxpayer resources. But as I said before, that didn't happen. The BOJ just had an IOU on its balance sheet. And that IOU, they could not trade, they could not repo, it represented a dead asset. We rectified this in 2018 and 2019 by transferring the securities required by law to cover the cumulative losses BOJ made over the previous decade. And you can see transfer securities in yellow. And all this did was to plug a receivable that the BOJ had. This was particularly important in preparation for central bank independence and with the renewed focus on the new mandate of central bank governance and central bank accountability. Because the activity with which how they would implement their function is by having securities that they can repo with the market. Prior to this, the BOJ was fighting with one hand tied behind its back. Madam Speaker, would you believe that the BOJ capital was stated at $2 million in the original 1960 Bank of Jamaica Act? In 1976, the BOJ's capital was doubled to 4 million Jamaican dollars. And Madam Speaker, the BOJ's capital remained at that figure of $4 million over the 42 years between 1976 and 2018. The central bank's capital was $4 million, Jamaican dollars. That's like asking a man to paint a house without a paintbrush. So, Madam Speaker, in 2018, we also injected $20 billion of permanent capital, which is capital that cannot be removed. into the BOJ in 2018 to empower it to fulfill its mandate. Because if you want to be an independent and sovereign country, able to withstand economic declines and economic shocks, you need a strong central bank. Not a central bank with $4 million of capital. Madam Speaker, we made a deliberate shift in monetary policy towards inflation targeting. And the reason why I have inflation targeting 2.0 is because in 2018 what we did was to ensure you have exchange rate flexibility, because you cannot have inflation targeting if you don't have that. And once exchange rate flexibility came in, you saw what happened. Between 2018 and now, as I mentioned before, even in this speech, the policy rate was reduced 10 times. The policy rate at that time was a 3-month Treasury bill, it was at 5%. The policy rate changed to the overnight rate, and that came down gradually in steps to 0.5%. It would not have been possible without these steps that I'm describing. And inflation targeting has now been given the force of law with the BOJ Amendment Act, chiseled and passed, I'm very proud to say, with bipartisan support. Now, these series of steps, Madam Speaker, has led to a reversal in the fortunes of the BOJ. For the first time in, I don't know how long, the BOJ has had 3 consecutive years of profit, which should be the case. After a loss of $6.8 billion in 2017, which you can see in red, the BOJ made a profit of $9.1 billion in 2018, $15.8 billion in 2019, and $9.9 billion in 2020. And the vast majority of these profits were from ordinary operations. Only about 20% arises from realized foreign exchange gains. The BOJ has a huge portfolio of foreign assets, of course, and we've had a 3.8% annualized change in exchange rate since 2016, even in the pandemic, until now. By law, Madam Speaker, these profits are to be distributed to the Consolidated Fund for the benefit of the Jamaican people. And as I said before, there could hardly be a better time. By the end of 2019, due to the restoration of its profitability, the fortunes were reversed. You see, the blues now, after 2018, suddenly became positive, and the BOJ began to owe. But this is all, you have to remember, the audited accounts for 2019 are done in 2020. And just like how we are getting the audited accounts now in March, the audited accounts for 2019 would have gotten after the, in March or in April. Now, we had $90 billion of cash resources from 2020-21. And we suspended the fiscal rules, but the future remained unpredictable. We knew we'd need to make a big push to fund the recovery effort in 21-22. And so by the time the things were calculated, we knew this year we'd have revenue short, and so timed the payment of the dividend to coincide with this upcoming fiscal year. Now, bear in mind that the dividends can only have realized profits, and that's a whole big calculation that needs auditors even after these reports are prepared. So, Madam Speaker, good policy, Madam Speaker, good policy does not only consider today, it considers tomorrow. When we're doing these changes, we weren't only considering those in 2018. We're only thinking about 2018. We're thinking about the future, and thank God we did. At the end of calendar year 2020, the balance owing to the GOJ increased further with profits made during the year, and the BOJ is required by law to distribute to the Consolidated Fund, as confirmed by the BOJ auditors, 3 years of profits that totaled $33 billion. Yes. Yes. $33 billion. That is what we have used to make up the budget that we had this year. No, and remember that this dividends come out of distributable profits. The permanent capital still remains. Madam Speaker, I was going to say, good policy pays dividends literally and figuratively. No, it's important, Madam Speaker, that this does not represent recurring revenue. We will not have this $33 billion next year. Okay? Which is why I am so zealous about a quick economic recovery. We have to begin the recovery in the upcoming fiscal year. Madam Speaker, the one-off dividend of $33 billion will facilitate the $60 billion social and economic recovery and vaccine program for Jamaica, known as the Serve Jamaica program. Now, as I list the allocation of resources, just think about, and one thing I should say, Madam Speaker, is that the new BOJ Act is going to require that, which is going to come in effect on April 16th, that monetary liability, the capital has to be at, capital plus reserves has to be at 5% of monetary liabilities before dividends are paid, which is a more conservative approach. And what will lead to dividends that are lumpy. Over 8%, 100% of the profits will be distributed. Between 5% and 8%, very technical stuff, only 25% will be distributed. We expect that during the course of this calendar year, the BOJ capital and reserves will be at 5% of its monetary liabilities. So let me go back. During the course of the year. Madam Speaker, the $60 billion Serve Jamaica program. And as I go through it, I ask you to think about the impact of good policy. Madam Speaker, it will consist of $10.5 billion in special resources for the Ministry of Health, including $6 billion for the procurement, storage, and distribution and administration of vaccines. Now, the minister has circulated a budget that has the cost of the vaccines at just over $3 billion, but their cost of distribution and storage and others. And, we'll have a conversation at the end of the year, how much he has left. But we are making sure, that we give what is needed, Madam Speaker, for Jamaica to achieve herd immunity this year.
Vaccine prices remain.
Yes, vaccine prices can change, true. Yeah, they can go up and down. Yeah. Madam Speaker, the $10.5 billion, $1 billion for personal protective gear, $1 billion for drugs and reagents, and $2 billion for regional health authorities to pay arrears to suppliers that I alluded to earlier. The suppliers sometimes are small and medium-sized businesses, Madam Speaker, and we feel for them too. Some of them have been, they call me now. Up to this morning, I got a call. Yes. And I had to tell them, I'm going to speak this afternoon, and I'm going to talk, $2 billion is coming to the regional health authorities. The new year begins April 1st. The problem is going to be addressed. Madam Speaker, we have put the funding aside under this. In addition to healthcare and vaccines, another critical part of the Serve Jamaica program is the upgrading of our physical infrastructure island-wide. As such, we have allocated $31.1 billion to an infrastructure program to drive jobs and economic activity, improve productivity, and strengthen resilience. Madam Speaker, it will consist of $17.7 billion allocated to the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And this allocation will allow infrastructure improvements on the roadway between Harborview and Yallas, and the construction of a new toll road between Maypen in Clarendon and Williamsfield in Manchester. Now, Madam Speaker, we are focused on economic recovery, right? And we have to get it done this year. Yeah, it has to start. Now, all economic activity requires transportation. By making transportation of people and goods more efficient, we improve the productivity of our economy. And improved access provided by the project will open up eastern Jamaica for new housing and commercial and industrial development. Minister Montague will tell you that alignment in Manchester will open up mineral-rich land to the possibility, the minister has to approve it, to the possibility of mining. And all of the aggregate required for the construction will be locally supplied and will require transportation. Over 100 trucks are going to be involved, and all of this is being supplied locally. Now, Madam Speaker, $8 billion is being allocated to thousands of people, Madam Speaker, and I'll come to that in a second. $8 billion is being allocated to the Special Public Investment Infrastructure Program to improve the productivity, increase resilience with installation of drains and water and wastewater and sewage infrastructure. The widening and dualization of major thoroughfares, the construction of related road upgrading, and this is captured under the public investment management, the contingency provision, because we still have to conclude that process. And Minister Warmington is going to tell you all about this project in due course, or maybe the Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, $3.7 billion is allocated to secondary road repairs across Jamaica. Madam Speaker, we hear the cries, Madam Speaker. We hear them. We get them. And what we're doing is we are doubling the allocation to secondary roads, Madam Speaker, so that we can have major roads in constituencies, neighborhood roads, community roads. Every constituency can get some road fixed. So I want you to watch it, Madam Speaker. We don't do things randomly. We are dealing with it at the level of the highways, Madam Speaker. Right? 17.7 billion. We're dealing with it at the level of the byways, Madam Speaker, with 8.8 billion, the major roads. And we're dealing with it at the level of the community and neighborhood roads, Mr. Speaker. We're taking a comprehensive approach, Madam Speaker, to this business of infrastructure. And, Madam Speaker, if that were not enough, we're dealing with it at the level of the planning and the conceptualization, because $1.2 billion is going to be applied to the Montego Bay bypass for the people of St. James. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to inform this House that this will be the largest program allocation to physical infrastructure tabled by any government of Jamaica in budget history. We expect the infrastructure component of the Serve Jamaica program to generate thousands of construction jobs that will help us to recover stronger. Now, in addition to healthcare and infrastructure, the Serve Jamaica program is also focused on promoting economic activity and growth in order to generate employment. As such, $5 billion is targeted in the financing of businesses. Madam Speaker, the COVID Economic Recovery Task Force recommended that we accelerate the digital transition of the economy. Our economic recovery becomes more robust and more resilient, and our economy becomes more efficient when micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, or MSMEs for short, adopt digital solutions. These can include installation of e-commerce capabilities where MSMEs can sell their products and services online, cross-border e-commerce platforms on the front end where MSMEs can sell overseas, earning foreign exchange, digital ordering and food service and retail businesses can put a front end on their system, right, so that a physical presence is not required and you can order your food from the restaurant, as well as the facilitation of online payments and other digital platforms. Madam Speaker, the Development Bank of Jamaica has an existing program that provides a $200,000 grant to qualifying MSMEs for them to invest in this digital transition. Yes. And they have a pool of 25 providers of IT services who've applied to be considered as eligible providers of the service. So they would apply, they're eligible provider, the MSME applies, MSE gets the grant, and they go to one of these 25 Jamaican IT firms who puts the front end on their business. Now, Madam Speaker, under the Serve Jamaica program, the government of Jamaica is going to scale that up. And $1 billion we're going to provide to the DBJ so that MSMEs that qualify for the Go Digital grant will be able to get up to $800,000 in 2% interest loans to be used to support this digital transition. Not all of them will need the full $800,000. So as a result, we're going to expect thousands of medium-sized firms to suddenly transition online, small and medium-sized firms. Madam Speaker, allowing them to showcase their products and interact with customers and allow the customer to make a decision about the product and then have the product delivered through existing channels. Madam Speaker, of the $5 billion, $2 billion will be used to seed 2 equity funds exclusively focused on providing equity financing to MSMEs in Jamaica. Equity is permanent capital, and by increasing the availability of institutional forms of equity capital, we improve the ability for MSMEs to grow and flourish. Madam Speaker, there will be a call for proposals for fund managers who can raise additional funds, and the DBJ will invest alongside these investors. So this $2 billion is going to leverage up to a total of $8 billion. And we're not having one fund. We want to have more than one so funds can compete. This is a government that believes that when you have competition, you get better results. Okay? So, and there's a fund underway already. So this will be the third. These two will be. So we're going to have 3 equity funds dedicated to MSME equity financing and funds investing here in Jamaica, leveraging this $2 billion to create a pool of potentially $8 billion of investable assets. And the final $2 billion of that, Madam Speaker, will be in direct and ordinary loans to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program also includes $1.7 billion for production incentives to farmers and continued rehabilitation of roads in rural farming communities in the agricultural sector. So I know the minister, when he speaks, he'll tell you that we have a lot of people who are doing new things, right? New crops for export, right? And the productivity incentives that his ministry will oversee will help that production to be accelerated, so our recovery will be enhanced. And some of these funds are for rural road improvement in those communities, so that as you go to the market, the product can get there safely. Madam Speaker, $1.8 billion to expand Wi-Fi and broadband in schools, communities, and town centers. $1.8 billion to expand Wi-Fi and broadband in schools, in communities, and in town centers, in particular in rural areas, through the Ministry of Science, Energy, and Technology. Madam Speaker, there will be $8.1 billion in targeted social support above and beyond the $16.4 billion already announced. $6 billion of this is captured under the Ministry of Finance. And now, when we spend, Madam Speaker, on our economic recovery, that it will positively impact social recovery through the employment channel. So as the construction projects get going, people will be employed, and there'll be social spill-off benefits. But we also have to make allocations where the social benefit is one of the primary objectives, where possible. And our environment is improved as a result. Right? This is absolutely necessary. It's vital. So, Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will provide $300 million to the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development for the Paint the City initiative, an innovative initiative, Madam Speaker, that will beautify and upgrade select town centers, including right here in Kingston, generating thousands of temporary jobs while also improving our environment. The Paint the City initiative will engage thousands of youths in painting murals in 21 communities in Kingston, in areas. I don't know if you've seen the murals that are coming up in downtown Kingston. They're absolutely stunning and beautiful. Absolutely stunning. So in areas of high historical and cultural value that have a high level of visibility, right, as confirmed by the KSAC, we're going to see murals coming up, beautifying Kingston. And the beautification will extend to rural town centers. Including installing perimeter fencing, cleaning beaches, rehabilitating sidewalks, and cleaning drains, upgrading community parks and other projects. Minister, the Honorable Desmond McKenzie, whose program this is, will tell you all about it in his presentation. Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will also provide $200 million to the National Works Agency for river training activity. Which Minister Warmington was very excited about, or is very excited about. And this will employ Jamaicans in rural Jamaica in necessary disaster mitigation work, protecting lives and livelihoods. They will be involved in removing silt and other material from sections of selected rivers, installing gabion baskets, right? Gabion retaining walls, some people call them gabion baskets, and related activities to improve the water flow, right? So now the water goes this way. We want to improve the water flow, right? You want to straighten the river. The program is called Train the River. The Train the River program, which will reduce the probability of flooding. River training. Madam Speaker, thousands of Jamaicans in rural Jamaica will be temporarily employed. And what you see we're doing here is a part of the economic and social recovery is to make sure that people have an income. Yes. But we want them to have an income by doing something productive. And if that something productive can improve our environment and make us more resilient against disaster, all the better. Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will provide $160 million to the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development above and beyond customary allocation for the additional support of the destitute, the indigent, the infirmed through the poor relief. And Madam Speaker, this amount includes $6 million in grants for persons working in burials and cremations and the building of vaults for the funeral industry who are being affected by the current ban. Madam Speaker, we are concerned that the measures which will continue to affect our sportsmen and sportswomen and our entertainers. Yes. So we are proactively, on top of the ministry's budget, allocating $50 million to the Ministry of Culture, Gender, and Entertainment and Sport to support those in the entertainment and sporting fields who continue to be hard hit by the pandemic. Madam Speaker, we cared in 2020 and we care in 2021. Madam Speaker, $189 million will be in additional one-off special COVID-19 related support to the Constituency Development Fund towards digital devices in collaboration with e-learning. After the appropriate process initiated by the Member of Parliament, constituents will be provided with vouchers by e-learning that can be used to purchase digital devices at approved vendors. So we expect just on top of the 122,000 devices I mentioned earlier, an extra 10,000 devices through this method, through the Constituency Development Fund, Members of Parliament working with the e-learning. Madam Speaker, as I said before, we cared in 2020 and we continue to care in 2021. A similar allocation of $140 million will be made to the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development for municipal corporations for the same activity of providing vouchers for digital devices. Madam Speaker, $40 million to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for the disabled community. Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will provide $75 million for 5,000 contract carriage operators who paid license fees in 2020. Madam Speaker, 21 in this fiscal year. Madam Speaker, these contract carriage operators have to buy a vehicle, they have a loan outstanding, they are required to be licensed to pay a $15,000 license fee to the government every year. They paid those license fees last year, but as we know, had no business whatsoever. Tourism has not been operating at any level that's consistent with his history. And so what we're saying is all those who paid their license in 2020, Madam Speaker, the government will pay their license in 2021. Madam Speaker, $75 million for 15,000 route taxis who paid license fees in 2020. Now, they had some business. They were not like the tourism sector, right? But even in this measure here, they've been kind of... So what we're going to do here is all those who paid their license fee in 2020, the government will pay 1/3 of their license fees in 2021, Madam Speaker. And Minister Montague, Madam Speaker, has been a fervent advocate of the taxes on contract carriage.
Provided they behave well on the road.
Provided they behave well on the road. Yes.
You can't brush up that 30%.
No, stop it now. Stop it. Don't go too far. Madam Speaker, there'll be $1.5 billion in other social programs to be announced by the Prime Minister that will benefit thousands more. And the SERVE program, as I mentioned earlier, is also providing other support. Now, very importantly, Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will provide $3 billion for the continuation of the CARE program's set cash unemployment support grants that support those who earned below the income tax threshold who have been unemployed as a result of COVID-19 pandemic from all sectors, and the CARE program's best cash grant that supports tourism employment, Madam Speaker, and these amounts will be paid in the quarter April, May, and June. And I will discuss how those who are on the set cash and best cash ensure that they can receive these benefits. We expect 50,000 Jamaicans, Madam Speaker, to benefit from these grants. Madam Speaker, this will make, Madam Speaker, the unemployment support by way of direct transfers for up to 50,000 Jamaicans on a monthly basis for from March to the rest of 2020 is unprecedented in Jamaica's history. Direct transfers to the accounts of persons who have been unemployed by the pandemic. No, it's not everything. There are people who are unemployed who are not on set cash. They somehow didn't get on. But the fact that we have been able to support 50,000 Jamaicans is unprecedented, Madam Speaker. Now, by is it June or July? We expect Jamaica's vulnerable population, as the Minister of Health had disclosed yesterday, to be vaccinated. And we expect North American and the UK population to be substantially vaccinated. And so we expect increased economic activity to begin, if not before, certainly by then. Madam Speaker, with our unprecedented $31 billion infrastructure spend, thousands of jobs will be created for young people. With our Paint the City and river training programs to improve the environment and increase resilience, we'll be creating thousands more temporary jobs, mostly for young people. Madam Speaker, we have to have something for those who may not be able to go out to the work site because they are up in age. All right, so what we're doing, we're providing weight, we have shifted the weight towards things that can generate economic activity because we must recover. The recovery must start this year. And we know the employment will also have a social spin-off. But not all those who are in need can go out and work. And not all are in infirmaries that the Ministry of Local Government looks after. So, Madam Speaker, as soon as the conditions allow, right, so we're announcing these benefits, but we'll time the implementation of them to be consistent with the conditions that are at play. The Serve Jamaica program will roll out the conditional cash transfer for the vaccinated sub-program for all persons aged 60 and over who are not in receipt of a paycheck or a pension greater than 1.5 million per annum, as evidenced by the records at Tax Administration Jamaica, and who have been vaccinated, as evidenced by the records of the Ministry of Health. So, Madam Speaker, there is public interest.
It's a conditional cash transfer.
Madam Speaker, there is public interest in ensuring that the vulnerable population is vaccinated. And we also want to ensure that older persons who cannot take up work opportunities available on the Serve Jamaica program and otherwise are not a part of, have no formal income, receive a grant. Madam Speaker, we expect in excess of 100,000 Jamaicans to benefit from this CCTV program. And the benefit will be 10,000 Jamaican dollars, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we cared in 2020 and we care in 2021. If you're over 60 and you're not in receipt of a formal income and you have been vaccinated, you can look forward to your conditional cash transfer once the conditions are right for the collection. Madam Speaker, this is a grand total of almost $60 billion dedicated to our social and economic recovery and vaccines for Jamaica program, the Serve Jamaica program. Though we've been hard hit by the pandemic, we dug deep, Madam Speaker, and we're delivering for the Jamaican people. These expenditures on social and on economic recovery and vaccines would not have been possible without the one-off policy dividend from the Bank of Jamaica. Good policy, Madam Speaker, matters. Now, I wish I could upsize the Serve Jamaica program to 100 billion or 200 billion, but that's not feasible without increasing our already high debt and introducing the certain risk of instability. I want to spend a few moments, Madam Speaker, on that. And as is my style, I want to be brutally frank with the Jamaican people. Around the world, debt to GDP ratios have increased considerably as a result of the pandemic. Most countries have had no choice but to borrow more money. They did not have the cash resources and the policy flexibility we have had here in Jamaica. In addition, GDP has been eroded around the world. Countries around the world are often grouped into high income, middle income, and low income. And debt to GDP ratios have also increased for high income countries. The United States, debt to GDP ratio is at 100%. However, these countries are much more diversified, with much more robust economies, and with a great stock of wealth, which makes them less vulnerable to risk and to external shocks. A Category 5 hurricane may imperil Miami, but it will not derail the United States. Alumina prices tanking may affect Louisiana, but it won't even register in Washington state. Low-income countries have experienced, and that's low-income who even have per capita GDP below our levels, have experienced large increases in debt ratios too, but they can benefit from multilateral debt suspension initiatives extended to the poorest countries in the world. Let me be the first to tell you that it is very likely that middle-income countries with high debt ratios as a result of the pandemic will face one of two options: to restructure their debts or to reduce their debts through the kinds of consolidation that we have had to do. Now, when you see it happen around the world, remember, I mentioned it here in this budget presentation. In this crisis, though because every country is pretty much on its own, and there's no money sloshing around from bilateral creditors or donors, because these creditors are also engulfed in the same crisis. Now, Jamaica has already had 2 debt restructurings in the last decade, which were extremely costly in many ways, and we cannot afford a third. We cannot take any chances with our debt perched at 110% of GDP, with the range of vulnerabilities and risks that we face, any one of which could push us over the edge. Too much rainfall has regularly sent our economy sinking. Drought or too little rainfall regularly depresses economic output. Tropical cyclones or hurricanes have flattened our economy in the past. Commodity price volatility, oil, bauxite, alumina, grains, soybeans, have wreaked havoc on our economy and our lives in recent times. Geopolitical tension has created instability in the past. Sanctions against Russia and against Venezuela led to massive declines here in Jamaica. Any one or more of these variables, which are outside of our control, can set us back, as has happened before, and can set us back before we have the chance to recover. And this is before you consider the risks associated with the potential evolution of the coronavirus into more deadly and resistant strains. We are far more resilient today than we were 10 years ago. Yeah, far more resilient. But we remain a small open economy with vulnerabilities, and our policies have to take account of the reality of the risks that we face. We cannot empty the cupboard. My fellow Jamaicans, we have to take responsibility for our vulnerabilities. Our policies have. We have to think for tomorrow as well as for today. At a minimum, therefore, we have to ensure that we can cover our interest costs, which constitute the major proportion of our non-discretionary expenditure, which means we have to reserve the $125 billion of revenue to pay for the interest. And, with the approval of Parliament in this fiscal year, we suspended the fiscal rules. And we were greatly aided by the opening cash balance. Without the benefit of this cash cushion, we have to use the proceeds of our revenues to pay our interest bills. Borrowing to pay interest, as we did in the past, given our debt levels, will put us on an unsustainable path once again, with adverse implications for jobs, investment, interest rates, and other economic variables, seriously complicating our economic efforts. at recovery. Nobody wants that, Madam Speaker, and nobody should. That would mean bringing back years and years of the tremendous sacrifices of the Jamaican people from 2013 to 2019 and bringing those to naught. That will not happen, Madam Speaker, under this government. And specifically, Madam Speaker, speaking as the Minister of Finance, that will not happen under my watch. With God's help, not under my watch, Madam Speaker. We will pursue the responsible path. We will prioritize our expenditure to achieve social and economic recovery in the quickest possible time. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to turn my attention to revenue measures for the upcoming fiscal year. I am pleased to begin my remarks by informing the people of Jamaica that there will be no new taxes. Madam Speaker, no new taxes. We are prioritizing economic recovery, which we want to achieve in the quickest possible time. Increases taxes at this time would run counter to that objective. Madam Speaker, this is the 6th consecutive fiscal year where on a net basis we have not raised taxes. Madam Speaker, this is the 4th consecutive fiscal year where there will be absolutely no new taxes. Madam Speaker, there has been no 4-year period like this with no new taxes, at least in the last 50 years, if ever, Madam Speaker. And in the middle of an economic tsunami, under this government, there are no new taxes. Now, Madam Speaker, I had promised I'd address this topic, and I just want to speak to it. In 2003, the Customs Act incorporated provisions to allow for imported duties not exceeding a free on-board value of $20 to benefit from paying duties at a rate of 0%. In 2014, this threshold was increased to $50. Now, there have been many calls for this threshold to be increased once again. The effect would be that Jamaicans could import higher valued items without duties and taxes being levied on them. My fellow Jamaicans, I understand the request, but at this time, when the government's revenues have fallen precipitously, when we're still in the grip of the pandemic and risk remains elevated, where the government is dependent on a one-off dividend of $33 billion to take us through the upcoming fiscal year, and we won't have this revenue next year, it would be unwise to erode our revenue base with such a move. It's unwise because, one, Jamaica is tightly squeezed and we can barely afford to sacrifice even the smallest revenue amounts at this point. It could make our domestic wholesale and retail trade uncompetitive, threatening jobs and economic growth at a time we need it most. And any policy flexibility at this time should favor exports, wouldn't you think? When, we've had $2.5 billion of foreign exchange dry up. We have a bricks and mortar wholesale and retail trade with a significant stock of fixed capital investment in the ground that employs hundreds of thousands of Jamaicans. And the statin measures the wholesale retail trade as the largest segment of the Jamaican economy. The scenario where everybody sits on their veranda and imports their groceries from Miami is quite appealing. But I don't know, or buys all their auto parts online from Japan, without paying duty, is appealing. But it does not kind of compute for us now. For better or for worse, Jamaica depends on duties and taxes and imports to fund its activities, and there's a cumulative amount of, $183 billion that comes from these duties that funds education, health, security, and infrastructure. So we need to focus this time on restoring the foreign exchange revenue that we have lost. Right? A time will come when we can consider this threshold increase, but for the future. And for that, we need to build our domestic economy stronger and build back better. We were on track before the pandemic hit. Let's concentrate our energy on boosting value-added production so we can recover the output that we've lost. Madam Speaker, we don't print US dollars in Jamaica. Every US dollar you purchase in Jamaica was earned by someone. It was either earned by someone, it was borrowed from someone, or it was sent here by remittance. Those are only three possibilities. It was earned by someone, borrowed by someone, or sent by remittance. For US dollars to be available, there has to be a supply, and a supply can only come from one of those three sources. Arguing in our society about how this scarce commodity is allocated and the level at which it's available has been a preoccupation for much of the 40 years. And it's been politicized, truthfully, on both sides, which is unfortunate because it misses the real point. Some countries have foreign exchange controls where the central bank effectively rations foreign exchange and tells you how much you can buy and at what price. We rejected that long ago, and Jamaica don't want such a system. Yeah? If we don't want exchange controls and we want to be able to buy and sell freely with minimal restrictions, then clearly for any given level of supply, a market system is the best system of allocating those resources. And a subsidized system leads to losses for the central bank, non-transparent benefit transfers towards the largest users, and a huge bill for taxpayers. We're better off focusing our time, thought, and energies on how we can increase the supply of US dollars to our country, which is the real issue. That is the real issue. For too long, we have been skirting around the central issue, and there's no better time to focus on this than now, when our foreign exchange earnings are at the lowest levels in 30 years. We earn foreign exchange from exports of goods and services. Export of services is the tourism sector, and I know Minister Bartlett has a solid recovery strategy. With respect to the export of goods, since 2013, Customs had levied a Customs Administrative Fee, the CAF, which replaced the customer user fee, a levy which was deemed non-compliant by the WTO. The CAF was set at 3,000 Jamaican dollars per customs export declaration, and has remained at that level for the past 7 years. With the improving economic environment over the past 4 years, pre-COVID, and with advances in technology, an entire ecosystem of firms has mushroomed and is engaged in the manufacturing and exports of small value shipments. These companies, most of which are small businesses, are a very important part of the productive ecosystem. They contribute to the economy through employment, taxes, foreign exchange. They export candles, specialty garments, craft items, processed foods, homemade sauces, ceramics, paintings, handcrafted jewelry, cosmetics, soaps, coconut and other oils, and hundreds of other items that consumers around the world want to buy from our local manufacturers and artisans. However, Madam Speaker, when somebody buys online e-commerce, they buy one thing. And so the shipment can have value of 1,500 Jamaican dollars. And the government charges a customs administrative fee of $3,000. It's absurd. It's higher than the value of the product itself. The customer will often absorb the shipping costs, but more than often than not, the exporter has to absorb these disproportionately high government fees. And this has been the case since the CAF was introduced in 2013. When a shipment has a value of $5,000 and the government levies a CAF of $3,000, that shipment becomes uncompetitive as the CAF is 60% of the value of the shipment. And this has been the case since 2013. When a shipment has value of $20,000, the $3,000 CAF is 15% of the value of the product. This administrative fee imposed by the government is disproportionately hard on the backs of small manufacturers and artisans. And the e-commerce, where anybody can stay anywhere in the world and order what they want, is inhibited. Jamaica cannot be competitive in exports with this setup. We can't increase foreign exchange earnings while forcing our exporters to operate with their hands tied behind their backs. Let me just share with you some numbers so you understand the reality of this problem. In 2019-20, the latest year for which figures for full year are available, the Customs Agency processed just under 43,000 export good declarations. So 43,000 parcels of export. Of this number, 73% were by air, but they represented only 6% of value, right? So the vast majority, over 30,000 of the 43,000 wanted the quick delivery, but they're low value, and that is consistent with a growing e-commerce export business. 27% of them were by sea, but they accounted for 94% of the value. They can absorb the 3,000 easily. So what we have, Madam Speaker, is an emerging industry of exporting small value shipments for quick delivery. Of these 43,000 export declarations, just under 11,000 worth of value of $50 or less, which is about, in 2019-20, about $7,000. This is real live data. 11,000 of the 43,000 export declarations worth of value less than $7,000, and the government charged them $3,000. Jesus. And not almost another 11,000 were between $50 and $500. So a total of 22,000, or 50% of the export declarations were for values less than $500. Madam Speaker, the government will support the emergence of the e-commerce export sector and the manufacturers and artisans that are earning foreign exchange for our country through this modality. In today's Jamaica, with opportunities available and the need to encourage and support export, the cap for small value exports is, frankly speaking, ridiculously counterproductive and needs to be abolished. It belongs in the same rubbish bin as the minimum business tax. It belongs in the same rubbish bin as the asset tax for non-financial business. That this government abolished a few years ago. As such, Madam Speaker, this government will abolish the customs administrative fee for permanent exports of value less than or equal to $500. Now, here's the thing. This is estimated to cost $70 million, an amount that we can afford under the circumstances, even at this time, and is one of the best investments of $70 million we could ever make. Madam Speaker, in concluding, 2020 was by far the most devastating year in Jamaica's economic history. The congregation of the faithful know that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Joy. Like a boxer in the ring, Madam Speaker, we have received a wrenching punch to the gut. However, we have some abdominal muscle beneath the skin that has allowed us as a country to absorb this blow and remain standing. When the pandemic hit, we were prepared, thank God. Good policy decisions by this government resulted in a cash cushion of $90 billion, which enabled us to avoid having to increase our debt while providing the fiscal space for a response. This government acted responsively, prudently, and caringly to address the fallout, accessed the rapid response facility of the IMF, suspended the fiscal rules, launched the largest social program in Jamaica's history, and provided grants to over 440,000 Jamaicans. The faith, commitment, and vision of the Jamaican people, both here and abroad, is heartwarming and a true testament of our resilience and fortitude. Despite the devastation and destruction experienced around the world, our Jamaican family members in the diaspora never forgot nor forsake us. And on the contrary, as a result of their generosity and kindness, remittances grew by 20% last year. Madam Speaker, uncertainties exist and risks remain. Though this is the worst economic contraction in our history, we're working towards a faster economic recovery than we've had before. Almost every industry in the Jamaican economy declined last year. The construction sector actually grew, as builders and developers remain hopeful of a brighter future. Although unemployment fell and many businesses were shuttered, Jamaicans decided they wished to fulfill their entrepreneurial visions, and they incorporated more companies than before. The PIOJ is forecasting economic growth and expansion for the new fiscal year. The Bank of Jamaica is forecasting economic growth and expansion for the new fiscal year, and it could begin as early as the April to June quarter. This upcoming fiscal year, Madam Speaker, will not be a repeat of the year that we are just concluding. While we cannot leave the cupboard empty, we have agency, and with God's help, we can bring about the future we all want to see, and we want a quick recovery, Madam Speaker. In that regard, good policy matters, Madam Speaker, and good policy matters more. Despite limited resources, as a result of the hit to revenues that we have suffered, we are in effect increasing capital expenditure by 20% in the middle of a pandemic. We are supporting businesses by improving access to equity and debt financing. We are catalyzing new equity funds for MSMEs, Madam Speaker. As we work towards recovery, we are embracing reform with ambition, and we are moving to modernize our economy, Madam Speaker. We are providing financial support to MSMEs who choose to go digital, Madam Speaker. We are transitioning swiftly towards a more digital society that reduces the reliance on cash, promotes digital transfers and commerce, and includes hundreds of thousands of the unbanked and underbanked. We will be modernizing our payment systems, paving the way for the introduction of digital currency issued by the central bank so that the hand-cart man can be included in the financial system. We'll be modernizing the 1944 Customs Act to create a simpler, more modern, more dynamic, and more efficient regime. We'll be modernizing the 1952 Income Tax Act, a multi-year effort. We'll work with our union partners to modernize public sector compensation. We are being ambitious, Madam Speaker, with reform to modernize our economy from the ground up. We will be modernizing the central bank by making it operationally independent next month, therefore deepening macroeconomic stability. We are decoupling the monetary cycle from the political cycle, de-risking the economy and providing the foundations for longer periods of economic prosperity, shorter periods of economic decline, and quick recoveries, Madam Speaker. We're deepening fiscal sustainability and stability with the establishment of an independent fiscal commission. We're modernizing our approach to the management of the fiscal cost of natural disaster. We're modernizing the same-day loan and payday loan and microcredit sector, protecting consumers. We are eliminating the need for 2 guarantors by the Student Loans Bureau, replacing with 1. We are implementing the Marcus Garvey Scholarship, targeted at developing public sector leaders, which is the largest educational scholarship program in the history of Jamaica, with the first 30 scholars to be selected before June. Policy matters, Madam Speaker, and good policy matters more. Good policies pay dividends, Madam Speaker. In the midst of the worst economic crisis in our history, the government of Jamaica, thank God, will be receiving the single largest dividend in the history of Jamaica $33 billion in the first week of April. Madam Speaker, God helps everybody for sure. But we are told that God helps those who help themselves. And dividends accrue when we invest in good policy. Madam Speaker, that dividend is financing the $60 billion SERVE program designed to boost social and economic recovery. And just by way of summary, it will provide $10.5 billion for health, including $6 billion for vaccines. The Serve Jamaica program will provide $31 billion for highways, bridges, main roads, neighborhood roads, drains, water, wastewater, Madam Speaker. The Serve Jamaica program will boost business through the provision of $5 billion for micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, including $1 billion to support them going digital, $2 billion to catalyze $8 billion of equity flow into MSMEs, and $2 billion for loans. Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will provide $1.8 billion to bring Wi-Fi connectivity near you, in your school, in your town, in your community. It will provide $1.7 billion for the productivity incentive for our farmers, rehabilitation of roads. The Serve Jamaica program will provide $300 million to Paint the City project, an innovative project that will boost our rural and urban towns. Madam Speaker, providing thousands of jobs. It will provide $200 million for the river training program that will employ thousands in rural Jamaica, and $50 million for the Ministry of Culture, Gender and Entertainment. We will provide, Madam Speaker, for our contract carriage operators and our route taxes, Madam Speaker, 5,000 and 15,000 of them respectively, and for local government, for the indigent through the Poor Relief Program, for the Labour and Social Security Ministry for the disabled, and Madam Speaker, for those who have been unemployed by COVID-19 pandemic, the Set Cash and Best Cash program will provide $3 billion of unemployment support for 50,000 Jamaicans during the period April to June. Madam Speaker, the Serve Jamaica program will finance the conditional cash transfer for the vaccinated, which will provide cash transfers of $10,000 for all those over the age of 60 who do not have a formal source of income that exceeds $1.5 million. Madam Speaker, we expect over 100,000 Jamaicans to benefit from this grant. Madam Speaker, we cared in 2020 and we continue to care in 2021. Madam Speaker, though we have been hard hit by the pandemic, we dug deep, Madam Speaker, and we're working hard to deliver for the Jamaican people. These expenditures on social and economic recovery and vaccines would not have been possible without that one-off dividend. And in addition, Madam Speaker, we're abolishing the custom administration fee for exports valued less than $500. The e-commerce export business will now have a better chance to thrive. We are freeing our small manufacturers, our farmers, our exporters, who employ thousands of people to earn more foreign exchange for us, Madam Speaker. And for the fourth year in a row, and even in the face of the precipitous decline in revenues, Madam Speaker, as a result of the worst economic crisis in our history, there will be no new taxes. Madam Speaker, it is an honor and privilege to serve the people of Jamaica as Minister of Finance and the Public Service and the people of St. Andrew Northwest as MP. Yes, thank you. It is a huge responsibility, Madam Speaker, especially at this time, and I give it my all. I'm extremely fortunate to benefit from the wise guidance and counsel of our Prime Minister, the most honorable and and the support, advice, and backative of my colleagues in Cabinet. Most of all, however, Madam Speaker, I want to thank you, the Jamaican people, for what you have demonstrated this year, the resilience and the will to win. Through good policy, we can shape the future we want to see. And my commitment to you is to continue to pursue good and responsible and disciplined policy, no matter how difficult. As we strive to emerge from this global pandemic quickly and together, we will recover stronger, and I firmly believe that there is a much better and brighter future ahead for our blessed Jamaica, land we love. God bless you, and God bless Jamaica. Excellent.
Wait. I'm good. Members, we thank the Minister of Finance for his presentation, which has taken us that has taken us to 6:28, but we have not, no, I'm serious, 6:28, but we have not in this Parliament had the benefit of a copy of his presentation. And we expect that by now we would have had a copy of the presentation. Minister, is there a copy for us? With the greatest of respect, I don't accept. Minister, I would like to think that we should have a copy of the presentation, and the opposition should have a copy, we should have a copy, and that is what I would like to see happen, because it is the right thing to do.
Madam Speaker, we know that it is the tradition indeed, but in light of the new technology that we are now embracing, the digital technology, the Minister of Finance has advised that the presentation will be made available to every member by email, soft copy, digitally, and so every member of this Honourable House will have a copy in due course.
So, House Leader.
So, Madam Speaker, I think that it may very well be something to look at, and I know that we have plans to have a special meeting of the Standing Orders Committee to look at a number of modern ways in which we can make this Parliament more efficient and more effective.
Madam Speaker, my colleague will. Madam Speaker, I don't want the point for us to miss the point. The Parliament has functioned and functioned well in a particular way. And I think if it is that the minister decided to break with tradition, it would have been good if they signaled, because we thought, as is usual, he would start the speech and later on, towards the end, something would be available. It might have been helpful for him to have signaled through the leader of government business that it would not be so. But, Madam Speaker, you know, look, so I'm just saying, Madam Speaker, there's no point of order. There's no point of order. There's no point. What's the point of order? Look, there's no point of order.
Madam Speaker.
House Leader, can I hear the point of order before I can rule? Which one, just a moment, which section is your point of order coming under? No, there are two sections in the standing orders that, yes, there are two sections that deal with it. Hold on.
Is there a requirement by the standing order that says that a presentation must be made and presented in the form of a booklet?
That's a speech. That's a speech. Madam Speaker, that's not the point of order.
No, man. So, all you mean you're getting up and making a wrong statement, man?
Member,
yes?
I will say that there's a lot that we do that is customary in this parliament, and it is customary for us to have it. And indeed, I recognize, as for myself, that we had not got a copy. And I do agree that it would have been courteous, it would have been better had we indicated that it is on so. We now accept it, and that is it. So I take it that we do not expect, House Leader, that presentations now will have to be printed in the budget today. I take it we are agreeing that it can be done this way.
Madam Speaker, I believe that as we evolve, I think that the digital practice will be an important part of the way forward. But suffice it to say that I agree that the tradition has been, but we also know that there is no requirement for publications of speeches to be provided ahead or during presentations. However, Madam Speaker, we do take the point very well, and the Minister has undertaken to ensure that every single member gets an e-copy of the presentation that has been made today. Madam Speaker, I beg to move just before we ask for the termination of this element of the debate and to permit for the continuation of the debate later this week. Might I ask for a recommittal of... Madam Speaker, I'm being guided that ahead of the recommittal request, I should move that the debate be suspended until Thursday, March 11, 2021, when the opposition spokesman on finance, Mr. Julian Robinson, will make his contribution to the debate.
Members, before you is the question that the debate be suspended until Thursday, the 11th of March, 2021, when the opposition spokesman on finance, the Honorable Julian Robinson, will make his contribution to the debate. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I beg to move for a recommittal of announcements. Indeed, Madam Speaker, when the Minister of Finance in tradition presents his speech, the ministry paper relating to the revenue measures is usually not presented for good reasons, one of which is to preempt the minister in terms of his announcements in that regard, especially that they have revenue implications. I therefore ask that the recommittal be done to allow for Ministry Paper number 18, 2021 revenue measures for the financial year 21-22 to be tabled. Just to say, Madam Speaker, this historic revenue paper, which is the 4th consecutive year that there will be no new taxes included in this measure. May it please the Madam Speaker.
Members, the question is that the item announcements be recommitted to enable the Ministry Paper number 18 of 2021 entitled Revenue Measures for the Financial Year 2021 to 2022 be tabled. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Also laid on the table of the House today is the following. Ministry Paper number 18 of 2021 entitled Revenue Measures for the Financial Year 2021-2022.
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, as indicated before, it is not intended to do any further business for the day, so I move that the House be adjourned until Thursday, the 11th of March 2021, when the Speaker then would be the Opposition Spokesman on Finance, Mr. Julian Robinson. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Question before the House is that the House be adjourned until Thursday, the 11th of March, when the Opposition Spokesman on Finance will make his presentation to the budget debate. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned until Thursday, the 11th of March.